Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the House Game and Fisheries Committee and the House Environmental Resources and Energy Committee to order and ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank everyone for coming today. We have an excellent turnout of members. I think first and foremost, we should thank Representative Tobash for hosting us here today, and also the Empire Beauty School. We really appreciate the hospitality and them allowing us to use their facility, and we're glad to be here in Schuylkill County. I'd like to start out by asking the members to introduce themselves. My name is Martin Causer. I represent the 67th District in McKean, Potter, and Cameron counties, and I'm the Republican chairman of the House Game and Fisheries Committee. And move to the left.
Good afternoon. I'm State Representative Ron Miller, 93rd Legislative District, and I'm the Republican chairman of the House Environmental Resources and Energy Committee. And for each one of the members that are in front here, for the testifiers also, I will remind you as it's your turn to speak to pull the mic close so that the video does pick up. And that's as close as I can get.
Jonathan Lutz, Executive Director for the Republican Committee, or Republican members of the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee.
Greg Vitale, State Representative from Delaware County. I'm the Minority Chairman of the Environmental Resource and Energy Committee.
Sarah Clark, Executive Director of the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee for the Minority Party.
Pam Snyder, State Representative from the 50th District.
Good afternoon. Deborah Kula from Fayette and Westmoreland Counties, 52nd District, and a member of the Game and Fisheries Committee.
Greg Lucas, 5th District, Erie and Crawford County.
Steve McCarter, representing 154th District, which is in Montgomery County and Philadelphia.
Tommy Sankey, 74th District, Clearfield County.
Becky Corbin, State Representative from the 155th District in Chester County.
Dawn Oberlander, Representative of the 63rd, which includes Clarion and part of Armstrong.
Marcia Hahn, 138th District, Northampton County.
Good afternoon, Representative Dan Mal from the 91st District, which is Gettysburg.
Good afternoon, everybody. Keith Gillespie, 47th District, York County.
Jerry Mullery, 119th, Luzerne County.
Garth Everett, 84th, Lycoming County.
Dave Maloney, the 130th, Berks County.
Joe Emmerich, the 137th in Northampton County.
Matt Gobler, 75th District, Elk and Clearfield Counties.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Pyle. I represent the 60th Legislative District in Armstrong and Indiana counties. I am prime sponsor of House Bill 1576.
And Mike Tobash, Representative 125th District, Schuylkill and Berks County.
Greg Raffensperger, I'm the Executive Director of the Game and Fisheries Committee on the Republican side.
I want to thank all the members for coming today. We're here today to conduct a joint public hearing on House Bill 1576, and at this point I would like to ask the prime sponsor of this House bill to for opening comments. Representative Pyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I thank all the other members. Pennsylvania, the word you hear most often is diversity. I see we have every corner of the state represented here, and I want to thank them. House Bill 1576 addresses how the Pennsylvania Game Commission and Fish and Boat Commission deal with endangered species. Under the current system we have now, any industry that requires the outdoors for natural resources, and where I live is very, very heavy in that. In fact, a lot of people will tell you Armstrong County is the state's treasure chest. There are no identifiable resources the state owns that we don't have. Now, why we filed this had nothing to do with that. why we filed this was a recent incident in which the Armstrong School District, a public entity, for the first time in 100 years, decided to build a high school. Because we live in the Indiana Bat Range, studies were required that we do a PINDI, a biological index of what living creatures were on the site. After quite a bit of time of hanging nets, they found we had none. Now, why I framed this bill is I discovered there is no way to appeal that. We hung the nets. We spent $20,000, $30,000 of taxpayers' money to go looking for things that essentially weren't there. Why then was there a requirement that they finance offset acreage somewhere else if we didn't have these things? So to get to the crux of it, what 1576 does, it makes them show proof. Show us what you are telling us is there. Right now, we've got a very expensive high school going up. For us, we're small like Pottsville is. We're not very big at all. It's the first time we've built a school in 100 years. And for some reason, somebody decided that since it was a good idea, we should just throw a little extra money into the pot to protect things that weren't there. And I feel that's wrong. I feel anybody, whether it's company or individual, that has to deal with these regulations, be able to ask for the simplest of constitutional requirements, habeas corpus. Show your proof. Right now, we don't have that. And in an age of openness and transparency in this Commonwealth, and I've been a seated House member for 10 years, I've gone through Right to Know, I've gone through all the public hearings, and frankly, I agree with it. Pennsylvania is an open state, and we should be. Thomas Jefferson once said, government exists only by consent of the governed, which implies a right to due process, to challenge the decisions made by your government without fear or retribution. Right now, that does not exist. And I feel if we are truly to live up to what we claim we are, an open and transparent day, a bill like 1576 is necessary. A government agency should have to show its evidence. If they do not, we kick it to an outside third-party independent arbiter, the Independent Regulatory Review Commission. As fact would have it, there are only 2 regulatory agencies in the entire state that are not subject to review by the Independent Regulatory Review Commission. Those 2 are the Fish and Boat Commission and the Game Commission. The Historic Museum Commission used to be on that list, but they were taken off a few years ago, and they too are subject to the independent rulings of ERC. And Mr. Chairman, without getting real long-winded, that's about what it does.
Thank you, Representative Pyle. I'd also like to offer our host, Representative Tobash, the opportunity for brief comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chairman of both committees having your hearing here in Pottsville. And I would like to reiterate your comments about thanking Empire Education. They're a private sector national organization. They've got their headquarters right here, and they have helped create really probably hundreds of thousands of careers with the work they do throughout Pennsylvania and the nation, so I appreciate it very much. Representative Pyle, my colleague, and I have worked together on this issue because we've seen firsthand the conflicts between agencies like DEP and the Game Commission and PennDOT, and we represent similar districts, districts rich in outdoor recreation, hunting and fishing, and both districts have a coal mining heritage. Yes, so we certainly welcome you here from the western part of the state. I'm on the right side of the state and you're on the left, and I think that means nothing more.
That might be the first time anybody's ever told us we were on the left.
So welcome to Schuylkill County. We're here to work to strike a balance between government regulation, private and public sector job creation, environmental improvements, and concerns, while at the same time doing our very best to make sure that tax dollars are being spent as effectively and efficiently as possible. I'm not sure what direction you've come from to get here today, but it's likely that you have witnessed some remnants of bad environmental policy. You may have seen some calm or waste coal banks. You may have seen some stripping pits that were never reclaimed. But environmental policy has changed today. We need active industry to remine and reclaim areas where surface mining from the 30s and 40s has caused damage. Without an active industry, we will just not be able to afford to repair our roads and deteriorating bridges. A core function of state government is protection of our citizens and its resources, but it's also a core function of government to provide services at a cost that our hardworking taxpayers in this state can afford. We have to be good stewards of every tax dollar that we ask our citizens to pay. So today we're here to hear testimony on this important issue, striking a balance between wildlife, our environment, and our need to provide the services that Pennsylvanians expect. We need to continue to look for ways to reasonably manage projects and cut costs. In a soundbite, we're looking for ways to get government out of the way and cut back on red tape. I think that many of you will draw a conclusion that I've seen replayed many times. The way it stands in Pennsylvania today, we suffer under environmental policy that is often stopping us from cleaning up our environment. That is environmental policy that is stopping us from cleaning up our environment. If a mine reclamation project is too costly for an operator to engineer and complete, and we have to wait for government funds, then reclamation projects just won't get completed. If a bridge needs to be replaced and the dozens of regulatory hoops that contractors have to jump through drive up the cost so high that we can only replace one bridge instead of 3, then we have to be prepared to face bridge closings or pay higher taxes. So I thank you again for your participation in today's hearing. I want to thank our testifiers in advance for their testimony and their expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tobash. I'd also like to recognize 2 other members that are here with us, Representative Jerry Knowles and Representative Brian Barbin, who have joined us. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Our first testifier is Sarah Miller. She's a regulatory specialist with the Pennsylvania Builders Association. Each of the testifiers have been given 10 minutes for their testimony, and then with questions after that. So welcome, and you're free to proceed.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Miller, and I'm currently the regulatory specialist with the Pennsylvania Builders Association. However, up until very recently, I spent 14 years working for the Independent Regulatory Review Commission, first as a regulatory analyst and then subsequently as the communications manager for the commission. PBA strongly supports a fair and open and especially standardized process for the listing of endangered species in Pennsylvania. We are fully supportive of House Bill 1576. We believe requiring the Fish and Boat Commission and the Game Commission to undergo the process of the Regulatory Review Act as evaluated by IRC will result in better administrative law for Pennsylvania with regards to endangered species listings. Currently, and under House Bill 1576, we believe that our responsibilities will not change. So this bill will not change any way that we have to operate when requiring permits from DEP. We will still have to go through the PINDI listing. We will still have to, if there is an endangered species that has been identified, we will still have to hire consultants to do the research to get our permits. So that's not what this bill does. This will not change any of the requirements for us when complying with the listings of endangered species. Historically, there have been many misconceptions or misunderstandings when it comes to the regulatory review process in Pennsylvania and actually what the Independent Regulatory Review Commission does. In an effort to help clarify some of those issues, I would like to address some of the misconceptions as they may pertain to House Bill 1576. First, this bill will not take away the statutory authority of the Fish and Boat Commission or the Game Commission to either list, delist endangered species in their regulations. IRC cannot require an agency to promulgate a regulation. IRC cannot tell an agency what to put in their regulations. IRC cannot bar a regulation from being promulgated by an agency. By law, they cannot do that. Only the General Assembly can bar a regulation from implementation, period. Second, IRC as an independent agency is charged with providing a thorough and objective review of regulations, and they do so based on a very specific set of criteria that have been given to them by the General Assembly. To comply with the criteria in the Regulatory Review Act, agencies must disclose all data they use when writing their regulation. They need to explain why the data is valid, consider utilizing other methods of using their regulatory authority, consider minimizing adverse impacts to small businesses, identify the financial and economic issues that will be associated with regulatory promulgation, and then describe how the regulation will affect the public health, safety, and welfare. And more importantly, agencies under the Regulatory Review Act must respond to all comments they received. It's called a comment and response document. So they must tell commentators that we've read your comment, this is what we understand you are saying, these are the reasons why we are not going to adopt, or these are the reasons why we do not agree with you. So there's a give and take with the agency. And one of the most important things to realize about the Regulatory Review Act are there are no statutory timelines contained in the Regulatory Review Act that require a 2-year promulgation process. Agencies have up to 2 years, but timelines on promulgation of regulations are specifically and only controlled by the agency promulgating those regulations. As I understand it, for instance, currently the Fish and Boat Commission must comply with the Commonwealth Documents Law. So they have to publish regulations in the Pennsylvania Bulletin and provide for a 30-day public comment period. They also are required under the Attorney General's Act to submit their regulations to the Attorney General for a review of form and legality. The Attorney General at the proposed stage is statutorily required to do that review within 30 days. IRC review of a proposed regulation would only add 30 days to the process at the proposed stage. IRC only has 30 days after the close of the public comment period to submit their comments, and that's it. PBA could not support any proposal that would add an unrealistic extension on any type of regulatory review. Efficiency and expediency are at the heart of the construction process in Pennsylvania, and advocating for any additional delays when we could see sites, our members could see sites sitting empty and not being able to work and cost them thousands of dollars every day. We couldn't do that. It's our opinion that the regulatory review process will create an open and accountable process which regulations will be allowed to be critically examined by an independent agency. The process will allow the regulated community, the General Assembly, and IRC to become integrally involved in the development and oversight of regulation, and we believe that IRC's involvement in the process really helps to ensure an agency's accountability and a judicious use of regulatory authority that will also help keep from imposing hidden or sometimes unseen costs from trickling down to small businesses. On behalf of the Pennsylvania Builders Association, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you for your testimony. I'd also like to recognize 2 other members that joined us, Representative Jarrett Gibbons and Representative Doyle Heffley. Thank you for being here with us today. First question will be from Representative Pyle.
Thank you very much for your testimony today. If I could steer away from PBA and back into the realm of IRC, I'm backbench rank and file member. I am not leadership. I don't deal with IRC a whole lot. When we say an independent third-party review, am I using that descriptive correctly?
Yes, IRC is classified as a legislative service agency, but we are completely independent from every other branch of government.
Okay.
They are completely independent from every other branch of
one
government.
other question, and put your PBA hat back on. I'm told that during certain times of the year when endangered species are in their mating and migratory periods, it's common to shut down big groups of land, and I imagine that affects the builders, people who would be in growth areas, putting up new housing, renovating old housing. Can you tell us of your experience with the Endangered Species Act and any building that may or may not have begun or been stopped, or just give me a broad picture?
I think, for instance, shutting down of construction based on migratory patterns or mating habits of specific species, absolutely, because apparently, from what I understand, you cannot go out and do your independent studies to find out if the species are, in fact, present but for certain times of the year. So if those times of the year are only May and June, but you want to start a project in October, you want to start the planning for that project and apply for your DE permits, you may have to wait until the next spring to actually do your study, your PINDY review. Because you need your PINDY review before it needs to be attached to apply for your DEP permit.
Oh, well, thank you. That's for a lot of folks that didn't know how that worked. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Pyle. Chairman Vitale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for your testimony, Sarah. I mean, to be clear, you're being paid for by the Builders Association today.
Correct.
And ERC has no position on this bill. Is that clear?
As far as I know, no.
Well, if I were to tell you they told me they have no position on this bill, would you believe that?
Absolutely.
Okay. And also, ERC has no scientific, ERC brings no particular scientific expertise to, would bring no scientific expertise to this issue or any other issue. You don't have scientists on staff, is that correct?
No, we do. No, they do not.
Okay. One of the provisions of this bill talks about the requirement that well, let me ask you this. Can you name any species currently listed as endangered or threatened in Pennsylvania that should not be on that list?
No, I would trust that the Fish and Boat Commission, the Game Commission, and DCNR with their plant listings are correct and trusted with their science.
Okay, okay. And would you agree that they do have good, the Fish and Boat Commission, the Game Commission, DCNR do good science?
I will not comment on whether their science is good or bad. I have not had the opportunity, nor am I qualified to review that information. However, like any other agency, I would assume that they are vested with a specific authority and expertise to fulfill their mission.
I think you're correct in that. This bill has a provision that threatened and endangered species, if I'm getting this correct, have to be relisted every 2 years or they lose their standing. What would be the benefit of having an agency have to go through this process to maintain the listing of in other words, is that a good use of taxpayer dollars in your opinion to require that a Fish and Boat Commission, Game Commission, DCNR, with regard to all of the 76 endangered species on that list, have to go through this process with those same species again every 2 years? Does that make any sense to you?
Well, the way I understand the bill is that the requirement for all species to be relisted within 2 years is a one-time requirement. And from my understanding, that science, I would assume that science has already been completed. If the Fish and Boat Commission, the Game Commission has done their science and have decided to list it, that science is readily available and would be ready to be submitted as one proposed regulation. You wouldn't have to do 76 proposed regulations. You could do one regulatory package.
Why would it make sense to do that again?
Because the bill is going to require it, and you are requiring this.
Well, it will only require it if we pass it. Why would that provision of the bill make sense?
That would be more appropriate to question the prime sponsor of the legislation rather than the Pennsylvania Builders Association.
Okay. With regard to the wild trout designation, if you're around in 2 hours, you'll hear Trout Unlimited say the current process for designating wild trout streams is rigorous, transparent, and considers public input. It is rigorous in the data obtained via well-established scientific samplings, and designations are based on strict technical criteria. Do you have any reason to disagree with that?
I have no reason to disagree with that. However, I will tell you that ERC currently reviews regulations for stream redesignations from the Department of Environmental Protection, who use almost exactly the same criteria when designating high quality exceptional value streams. Those regulations come through the regulatory review process.
Okay, you will hear if you're here in 2 hours from the Game Commission, and they will say, among other things, the listing of species through ERC process will be too time-consuming to respond to an immediate crisis that may be caused by a significant decline in population from disease or other population-wide limiting factors, allowing the species to become extinct. by the time ERC acted. Would it be safe to say that the ERC process is about 2 years, give or take?
I would disagree with that statement.
What, on average, if you looked at your 14-year career there, or however long that was, what's about the average time frame?
Each individual agency, I would not lump all of the regulations together and say it takes X amount of time, because each agency deals with regulations on a different expediency level. For instance, recently, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and we're talking from a time period of publication for public comment in March of this year until the time ERC approved the regulation at its public meeting in June of this year. It took 4 months to do a proposed and final regulation that would that moved the ginseng harvest timeline from August 1st to September 1st, and they were complying with the federal requirement from USFW. So they were able to move a regulation through the process within 4 months. And in addition, there are 2 other methods for regulatory review outside of the proposed stage.
Is 4 months below average, above average, average?
Below average. However, obviously, they wanted this
What's
regulation
average?
done.
What's average? Come on.
I would say for an agency that has to do a regulation for federal requirements or specific timelines, and you have to take into consideration, I'm not trying to split hairs, but if you are an agency who is not under the governor's jurisdiction, you don't have to go through the governor's policy office. The governor's policy office is the one piece of the puzzle that doesn't have a statutory timeline associated with them. They can keep a regulation for 90 days, 120 days. I don't know how long this regulation was at the governor's policy office.
Chairman Vitale.
I have one more.
This is not an interrogation. We have other members that would like to ask questions.
One more question, I'm done. Thank you. Again, this is testimony of the Fish and Boat Commission. The Fish and Boat Commission adopts threatened and endangered species listings and delistings as regulations, and accordingly adheres to the Commonwealth Documents Law, which requires publication of the Pennsylvania Bulletin and affords the public an opportunity to comment or offer additional data for at least 60 days. Proposed regulations now are also reviewed for legality and formed by the Attorney General's Office as required by the Commonwealth Attorneys Act. Frankly, we do not understand why we need an additional regulatory review step in a process that currently provides ample opportunity for public comment and review. What is the current problem here if this is being done?
The problem is I don't know what the Fish and Boat Commission or the Game Commission, why they would have not accepted my recommendations. They don't have to respond to me. They don't have to respond to the standing committees. They don't have to go through an independent agency. As we come before you today, we all, as you politely reminded me, we are working for someone. The Independent Regulatory Review Commission doesn't work for anyone but for the Commonwealth and administrative law, and the consistency of administrative law. So therefore, providing an independent review really helps us all.
But my question is, what's wrong with the current process?
Because
What's wrong with the current process?
There's not an independent agency providing the same review for these regulations that they provide for the Department of Environmental Protection or for the Department of Public Welfare. There's no one looking at the clarity, at the reasonableness. And when I say no one, I say that independent agency.
Which has no scientists on staff, is that correct?
That is correct. We as commentators give them information. That includes PBA, that includes Trout Unlimited, that includes Penn Future, that includes any interested party is able to send and commit comments to ERC for review, including the legislative standing committees.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Vitale. Chairman Miller?
Ms. Miller, as I understand it, a lot of the past questions that you just addressed were how much this might extend going through the ERC review process, the ability to put a certain species on the endangered list. Based on your testimony, and I believe your responses, it really only will add about 30 days or so. The key point is how long it takes for any agency, whether it's a department in the state or the Fish and Boat Commission or the Game Commission, to get everything in line. So if we're talking 60 days or 2 years or 3 years, it has more to do with the agency promulgating their regs and not so much as the ERC review process. Is that not what I was hearing you tell me?
That's correct. ERC cannot go beyond their statutory timelines.
So it's in statute. They cannot go beyond that timeline. So this can only ever add those 30 days.
Correct, at the proposed stage. At the final stage, there would be an additional 30 to 45 days
Okay.
for.
So we're looking at maybe 60 to 75 days, something along those lines.
Correct.
I just wanted to get it in the proper perspective. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. Representative Dan Mao.
Chairman, just in the interest of time, I'm going to just do a couple little quick clarifying things. Sarah, thank you for your testimony. ERC does recommendations only, correct?
ERC submits comments.
You submit recommendations and comments, but you have no authority to change anything, to hold anything. You can simply recommend. So if a particular department said, well, ERC said this, but heck with ERC.
Correct. All an agency has to do is respond to ERC's comments.
That's
they
it.
do not have to change.
They don't have
the
to change a thing.
No.
Okay. And just so I'm clear, and so everyone else in this room is clear, currently, and what the bill will do, currently ERC doesn't even involve themselves with fish or boat or game, correct?
Correct.
They do everything internally.
Yes.
No one oversees their regulations that they're about to promulgate or implement as it stands today.
All I know is that there is no ERC review of Fish and Boat Commission or
Okay,
Game
well,
Commission
that'll be a
regulation.
question that when they get up, that I'll ask them if there is somebody that oversees their regulations. And what was just mentioned, the timeline. You guys have a timeline. Do the departments that you do oversee do all the other departments have timelines in which to do their work?
From what I remember, each agency has their own way of promulgating regulations. For instance, I know DEP has to go through some advisory boards, and they have to go to, the governor's policy office, and then they have to go through the environmental quality board. So that adds time on the front end to their review process of a proposed or final regulation. But I would assume that every agency has different internal workings of how they promulgate their own regulations.
Again, I guess that's going to be a question for them when they get up there. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mao. Representative McCarter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your testimony. I'm trying to, as a freshman, new to the process here in Harrisburg, and trying to understand the ERC process a little bit better, if you can help me with that. And let's go back historically first. Back in 1982, when the ERC process was created by statute, there were 3 agencies, as we heard earlier, that were excluded from that. Why did they exclude those 3 agencies?
And to this day, I still can't give you an answer for that.
Well, in their description, it talks about public policy. And one would assume, and as I've gone back and looked at a little bit of this, that in terms of the environmental areas, it seems as if they excluded that because they didn't want the scientific community to have to battle out, if you will, in terms of in the public arena and to politicize the process when it came to endangered species and other areas. Would that be correct in your understanding?
I would remind you that DEP, who does a ton of scientific studies and is required to provide that science and data also to ERC, that I understand where you're going, but I mean, DEP does the exact same promulgation process through ERC with
Correct.
science.
And I mean, they do that, and DEP, well, if we can say that each of these particular things in the process, as I understand ERC now, coming forward, if a species is specified to become on the list, either threatened or endangered, would go to the ERC process, the committee would make recommendations. Those recommendations now go to the standing committees, is that correct? In the process, if there's a disapproval resolution that would come forward, I assume it would go to those committees. Is that where that happens?
I think you're confusing the 2 steps. At the proposed stage, ERC submits comments, and those comments go to the standing committees that have the regulatory oversight for those agencies. At the final stage, ERC can approve or disapprove the regulation.
But their regulation, their decision-making is subject back to the committees, correct? It gets moved to the committees.
The standing committee,
The standing committees.
IRC's recommendation or
Yes, I'm
efficient
trying to
vote?
understand that process. Isn't that how it moves forward, that there would be a recommendation? Let's assume that IRC says, yes, there should be this, whatever. This goat should be put on the list for endangered species.
Okay, but IRC wouldn't, I think I understand now, and I apologize for not following you. IRC would never provide an opinion about a specific endangered species, for instance, a goat, a turtle, a horse. That's not, IRC only reviews the regulation based for clarity, reasonableness, acceptable data, the small business amendment, whether a standing committee has a concern, does the agency have a statutory authority to promulgate legislative intent, compliance with IRC regulations.
I'm trying to look at, I'm trying to understand the chart, the flow
Right.
chart in terms of what takes place. And as it says on the flow chart, the IRC acts at its public meeting, and then it has 20 days to come up with whatever it's suggesting. It approves or it disapproves.
Right.
And at that particular time then, as the regulation is moved forward, it can be withdrawn, okay, or it can move forward, and then it acts at its second public meeting. And at that point, it goes to another through review period, and then it ends up in the committee disapproval resolution, or it reports a disapproval resolution that ends up going to the Attorney General.
The chart that you've been provided, that is what happens to a regulation that completely falls off the rails. Say IRC disapproves at its first public meeting. The agency then has options. Do you return the regulation with changes? Do you not return the regulation with changes? Or do you withdraw the regulation completely? IRC gets a second bite at the apple. There's a second public meeting should they choose to return the regulation. Once IRC either approves or disapproves at that point, IRC is completely out of the process.
How does it then get to the committees in terms of the standing committees?
Sure.
What is the role of the standing committees, therefore, in this process?
Sure. At the proposed stage, the role of the standing committee is to provide comments on the regulation to IRC and back to the agency. At the final form stage, the role of the standing committee is to either vote to approve the regulation, vote to disapprove the regulation, or vote to request additional time for review.
But going to the specific part of the bill then, as it says in here, to be effected by such designation to the Independent Regulatory Review Commission and to the standing committees of the Senate and House of Representatives with jurisdiction over the Commonwealth agency for the purposes of this act. So it does go to the standing committees, who then have have the opportunity, as I understand this, to decide whether in fact they're in favor of this or not in favor of this.
Correct.
And if it moves forward then, if they're not in favor, then goes back to that disapproval resolution, which would then be voted on the House floor and the Senate floor.
Right.
And then move on to the governor.
Correct.
Now, you're suggesting to me, and I'm hearing, there's two different things here. Number one, that this all could happen within 30 days or 60 days. The House and Senate are not always in session. So once this moves forward, this process is not going to be in 30 days. There's no way that it could be. Nor could it be getting to the governor, who then has a chance to veto and not veto. If the governor vetoes, then there would be a potential of override in terms of what happens. All of this process is going to be time-consuming.
The process you describe in the past 31 years has happened twice. Twice. That entire process you just described twice. And there have been over 3,000 regulations IRC has reviewed in its entire history. I can also tell you even that IRC approves, historically, IRC has approved 92 to 95% of all regulations at its first public meeting. I can also tell you in the past 5 to 8 years, the number of times a standing committee has either disapproved a regulation prior to IRC action or has requested 14 extra days to review the regulation, maybe 3, 4 specific instances. This process would not obviously take 30 days. However, if this process is invoked, the legislative intent of the Regulatory Review Act was to provide for the General Assembly to have authority and oversight over a regulatory agency.
Let me ask one final question, just to save some time here. At the end, it talks about if a regulation is permanently barred. What does that mean? Can you define that for me?
That means that the General Assembly has passed a law disallowing the agency from promulgation of the regulation.
So in other words, if a species is put forward and it gets through this entire process and it is permanently barred, that means that that species cannot be brought up again for how long?
There is no time limit on that. I mean, that is the General Assembly saying, we believe this is our law, then the governor has signed that law to bar a regulation, absolutely.
For the life of that particular term of the legislature, it couldn't be re-entered, or for
Well,
how long?
until a bill would be taken up to obviously rescind that legislation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative McCarter. And many of the questions that you're asking deal with the actual ERC process itself, and obviously Sarah is not testifying on behalf of ERC.
Right.
However, I will say that in addition to your testimony on behalf of the Builders Association, it's been very helpful that that you have a great deal of experience with working in ERC. So that's been very helpful. So I thank you for your testimony, and we appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Our next testifier is Mr. Thomas Au, the Conservation Chair of the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter. Welcome, sir, and you may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Au. I am the Conservation Chair of the Pennsylvania chapter of the Sierra Club. I'm appearing here today on behalf of the Sierra Club. Sierra Club wishes to thank the committees for inviting us to testify. The Sierra Club was founded in 1892 to explore, enjoy, and protect our planet. Sierra Club has about 24,000 Pennsylvania members. Our members include hunters, anglers, birders, plant lovers, hikers, and ordinary citizens who enjoy the outdoors. Nationally and locally, Sierra Club has been a leader in conservation practices and environmental protection. Pennsylvania is unusually endowed with wonderful natural wildlife, aquatic life, and plant species, and we should make the extra effort to protect them. We should protect these creatures and plants because they are part of the complex biology of our region and provide important biologic functions, such as controlling insect populations and filtering pollution. We do not know everything about how the ecosystem works. But we do know that many of these plants, wildlife, and aquatic organisms provide valuable biological services to all of us. The Sierra Club is concerned about the consequences of HB 1578 if it were enacted. We are concerned with Section 5 of HB 1576, which, as was explained earlier, that any action by a Commonwealth agency to designate fish, wildlife, or plants as threatened or endangered, or to designate a stream as a wild trout stream should be subject to the Regulatory Review Act. This would bring all actions by the agencies to list any fish and wildlife as threatened or endangered, or to list wild trout stream under the jurisdiction of the Independent Regulatory Review Commission. The Pennsylvania Game Commission is charged by the General Assembly to protect wildlife, including wild birds and other avian creatures. The Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission is charged by the General Assembly to protect fish, reptiles, amphibians, and other aquatic life. The DCNR is charged to protect plant life by compiling the Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Index, which identifies areas where rare plants live. The proposed provision would add an additional layer of government bureaucracy in second-guessing which species of fish, wildlife, and plant the Commonwealth should protect. When the General Assembly established the administrative agencies, it entrusted to these agencies professional and scientific judgment to design the mechanisms to protect and enhance the Commonwealth's natural resources. The state agencies which have the oversight responsibilities already coordinate their activities. The Fish and Boat Commission, the Game Commission, and the DCNR talk to each other regularly about the species which are threatened and endangered, as well as the best ways to protect them. The establishment of a centralized database would be helpful, but only if it is adequately funded and sustainably maintained. Such a centralized database would require a substantial investment of time and resources by the Commonwealth, which has not been made to date. The proposed legislation does not provide funding for such a robust centralized database. The state agencies already published the listings of their proposed actions in the Pennsylvania Bulletin. The agencies make available the scientific data that they possess in support of their actions. In addition, the agencies hold public hearings and public meetings to gather the views of interested stakeholders before taking action. I believe all these agencies know that public input is important and make great efforts to solicit it. Equally important is the need to act quickly when threats to these resources materialize. Disease, blight, and invasives can quickly spread to extinguish what were once thriving plant, fish, or wildlife populations. At its normal pace, the Independent Regulatory Review Commission process can take up to 2 years to complete. During this period, a threatened or endangered species can become extinct. Proactively protecting wildlife, aquatic life, and plants at the state level before the damage becomes irreversible is necessary to protect Pennsylvania's natural heritage. The proposed legislation requires only federally listed threatened and endangered species can be listed by the Pennsylvania agencies. The provision ignores the fact that Pennsylvania is the home to many rare and special species of wildlife, aquatic life, and plants, which may not be threatened elsewhere in the United States, such as the great egret, the long-eared owl, and the osprey. These species would receive no protection under the proposed bill. The proposed legislation also requires action by these agencies to be supported by acceptable data. Acceptable data, as defined in the bill, is current best available scientific and commercial empirical data as evidenced by in supporting documentation, statistics, reports, studies, or research. As it pertains to wild trout stream designation, such data that is replicable and testable. The question remains, data acceptable by whom? It is commonly recognized that the members of the Independent Regulatory Review Commission do not possess scientific expertise. I believe that this is an open invitation to second-guess the judgment of scientists and professional staff in the Game Commission, the Fish Commission, and the DCNR. Section 4D of the proposed legislation would also require an agency to remove currently designated or listed threatened and endangered species unless the agency redesignates the species within 2 years. The repromulgation of threatened and endangered species could consume all the agency's time and resources during the next 2 years. Finally, Section 6 of the proposed legislation seeks to limit the effect of threatened and endangered species in permit actions by Commonwealth agencies. When reviewing applications for permits, approvals, and other authorizations or taken actions, state and local governments shall consider impacts only to the listed species and their critical habitats included in the centralized database. Permit approvals, authorizations, or regulations shall not require persons to conduct field surveys or other activities to determine or evaluate the presence of species or their habitats. Basically, this provision exempts applicants from having to physically look at the location of their proposed activity. It would be shocking if any of the agencies identified in this legislation failed to conduct field studies to determine the presence of species prior to listing. However, in this provision, a sponsor seeking to exempt operators from conducting any kind of field work to determine the impact of their proposed activities on the threatened or endangered species or a wild trout stream. Such a failure to actually inspect the site of a proposed activity leads to environmental harm. We have pictures of well pads situated in floodplains and wetlands. While this provision may help expedite a permit, it violates the common sense warning that we actually look before we leap. We also, where applicants propose to construct pipelines which are scores of miles long, you regularly encounter wetlands, streams, and habitat that has not been previously surveyed by these commissions. And it makes sense to have someone actually go out and look at the site before proceeding. In summary, the Sierra Club believes that the proposed legislation takes a step backward in our efforts to protect wildlife, fish, and plants currently entrusted to the expertise of the Game Commission, the Fish Commission, and the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Without substantial changes, the Sierra Club would have to oppose this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The first question is from Representative Pyle.
Thanks, Chairman, and I appreciate your testimony. And this may come as a surprise. I agree with pretty much everything you're saying, but I have a little glitch. What happens if they don't find any of them there?
If they don't find any of these species?
That's happening repeatedly.
Oh, okay.
I live 300 miles from here.
You know, if they don't find it, then the project can proceed.
Why then would requirement for money for offset acreage be required if no species was found on the permit site?
Well, I don't know the particular
That's
fact.
common practice right now. Now, you identified that this was going to be cumbersome and slow everything down if we have a big problem pop up immediately, like and you identified disease, blight. Could you give me an example? Like what?
Well, we have a honeybee population in decline in the state right now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It hasn't reached the stage where the bee population could be, you know, listed.
It's a big concern at home.
Yeah, it is.
Hit on one.
Okay. Well, and if for instance, if the Game Commission scientists discovered that it's the point where the species could go extinct, it may be time for them to act quickly to protect the population. Now, you know, you mentioned, well, quickly is how fast the agency can put together a regulation, put together the science, make recommendations, consult with the public, and all that. Now, the previous testifier said, well, it can be done in 4 months. If it can, that's good. More likely, it'll take quite a bit longer.
Well, faster's better than slower when you're dealing with lives of any shape. I have a question though. Using your example, the honeybees.
Yeah.
Assuming that DCNR and Fish and Boat and Game Commission, everybody studies this and they say, yeah, you're right. The bees are all screwed up. We got to fix this. What if they can't find a cure?
Well,
what would happen in that case?
Well, one of the things is the science actually progresses over time,
Well-
and they do find cures for lots of things.
We've known about the honeybee issue for a while.
Yes.
And despite all the world-class research institutions we have, we
Well-
haven't been able to fix it.
Yes, but scientists are getting closer to isolating
Like viral stuff?
problems. Yeah. Well, we listed the bald eagle without knowing what was the cause of the bald eagle decline, and eventually the cause of the decline was found, and we were able to protect the bald eagle.
But that was artificial. That was man-made introduction to DDT, making eggshells thin that killed the eagles.
Yeah.
What if this is a naturally occurring thing that we cannot cure?
Okay, if it is.
Oh, there's one out there we've been working on for 10 years and haven't gotten anywhere. Keep going.
Okay, well, if it's something that we can't cure, the population will go extinct despite our best efforts.
Well, nobody wants that, obviously. We don't want to be the one that's in charge of seeing an entire species leave the earth, but what if we just can't fix it? Something like, God forbid, hantavirus or Ebola would get loose in a city core. We can't fix those. What would we do?
Well,
in regards, if that was an animal, I'm sorry, I wasn't wishing that on anybody, but
okay.
what will we do?
Well, the current regime for protecting endangered species is to protect the critical habitat.
You make a radius, like a quarantine area.
That habitat where they could reproduce, they would be able to regrow the populations.
I'm saying this has a pretty close to 100% mortality rate, the one I'm thinking of. I'm dying to hear how we fix this.
Well, I'm not a wildlife biologist, so I can't say. I don't have an idea about honeybees as to what is necessary to protect them. But I think some of the best scientists are working on it, and we can make progress. And initially, by listing a species as threatened or endangered, that doesn't mean we have to have all the answers.
When we're talking about jobs and public school districts expending huge sums to build a school, yeah, we kind of are talking about the human condition and how we interact with the animal condition. That's what I'm saying is, if we know an animal population has a nearly 100% mortal disease, wiping them out right now.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we've had the best minds at Penn State working on this forever and a day, and we have no cure, how long do we let them quarantine our areas, which you just said was what they do? How long do we let them quarantine them? I don't think they're coming back.
Well, if that happens, then they will become extinct, and the areas, the rules that we set aside to protect them can be extinguished as well.
Well, nobody wants that to happen to the honeybees. I live in a big agricultural area myself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Pyle. Representative Mount.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, in the interest of time, I'll make this pretty quick. And I'm trying to catch up mentally here with everything that's going on, but let me preface this by saying I appreciate what the Sierra Club is doing. Somebody's out there trying to look after our environment and for our future generations, and I get all that. Your concern is the health of our Earth and the species on our Earth. And at some point, you got to say, I think, that humans' intent and purpose of being here sometimes can outweigh overregulation. Okay, is what I'm starting to get out of this. And the health of humans is extraordinarily important, correct? As in, your health would be extremely important to you, correct? As all of ours would be.
That's
so
right.
if you went to the doctor and the doctor said to you, you've got X, Y, Z, and you're, oh my God, first thing you're gonna do is go do what? Get a second opinion. So why is it with this health, the health of our earth, all of a sudden we don't want a second opinion?
Well, in this case, we've actually had, second or third opinions. Multiple people weigh in on the decisions whether to list a species as endangered.
But with these two organizations, with these two departments, Fish and Boat and Game, they do everything internally. And as we heard testifying a while ago, even if there is an independent review looking at it, they have no teeth. And I can tell you, I've been in the House of Representatives 7 years now. I sit 4 committees every year. I've never once voted on a regulation. Maybe that's a problem we have, but I'm starting to think maybe second opinions would be good, not just for us, but for the health of our planet as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mao. Representative Heffley?
Thank you for coming here today.
Can you move the microphone over?
Thank you for coming here today. Question, I know earlier Representative Vitale had asked, commented about the builders, the testifier from the PA Builders Association, who they work for and who they paid for. The Sierra Club, who exactly do you work for? Where do you get your funding from? I mean, I see your ads, I know you have an agenda, but exactly who is paying you today and who funds the Sierra Club?
Well, the Sierra Club is funded by its members. We're a national organization. We are member-driven. We have a board of directors, national board directors, and we also have a state chapter executive board. We have specific campaigns that are funded also by some foundations.
And in those campaigns that would be opposed to certain types of industries and development, is that part of the campaigns?
Yes.
And what can you list a couple of those industries? Do you know what campaigns you have against certain industries throughout the world, throughout our state?
We have a lot of campaigns. Our newest campaign is Our Wild America, which seeks to protect wildlife in wild places. We had a Beyond Gas campaign, which tries to move us beyond natural gas. We have a Beyond Oil campaign, which tries to move us beyond petroleum. And we have a Beyond Coal campaign, which tries to move us beyond coal.
Your association is actively against the coal industry and the natural gas industry. And you would pretty much promote anything that would inhibit either the developments of those domestic energy here in Pennsylvania. Is that correct in saying that statement? I mean, I've seen the ads on TV.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, we want to move
You want
America
to
beyond
stop the
fossil
development
fuels.
of coal and natural gas in Pennsylvania, correct?
Well, development in I guess in the sense of new sources.
You want to, yeah. So like we would use up the coal we have now, but we couldn't get any more.
Well, yeah, I believe that's.
I think that in your testimony, obviously you're very passionate about protecting the species, as I think a lot of us are. I know a lot of coal miners in my district are also hunters and avid fishermen. But I think it's really clear in that you have an agenda against a lot of the domestic production of energy, which I think is vital that we strike a balance rather than say no, no, no all the time. And I think the consumers also, as the voters, that we're all reflected to represent their views. So I do believe that in this process with ERC reviewing some of these plans, in one of your comments you said that it would add another level of bureaucracy. And sir, I would ask you to speak with any business out there and talk about the bureaucracy and the permitting process right now. That's why we have the unemployment rates we do. And another one, you had said that ERC didn't have any scientists. So I guess I would think that only scientists in your mind are allowed to make decisions for people. I think we have elective folks here in the House and the Senate that do a pretty good job making informed decisions. I do thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you, Representative Heffley. Questions from any of the other members? Chairman Vitale?
Just to clear up a quick point, I think the
point I was trying to make is Sarah Mills being paid by the Builders Association to testify, and you're a volunteer, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the point is taken about the Builders Association and also about the Sierra Club. I think it's a relevant question, and appreciate Representative Heffley asking the question. Thank you for your testimony.
Well, thank you.
Our next testifier is Mr. Mike Welch, the Environmental Director with Glenn O. Hawbaker and the representing the Pennsylvania Aggregates and Concrete Association. Welcome, sir, and you may proceed.
I would first mention that the text that you were provided Friday, I've modified it only slightly, not in substance, but you will notice some slight changes. Good afternoon. I'd begin by thanking the committees of Games and Fisheries and Environmental Resources and Energy for the opportunity to offer testimony on behalf of the Pennsylvania Concrete and Aggregates Association. The information I will present is in support of the proposed Endangered Species and Coordinations Act. By way of introduction, my name is Mike Welch, and since 2010, I've been employed by Glenn O. Hawbaker Corporation and State College as their company's Director of Environmental Services. In this capacity, I am responsible for the coordination of all environmental permits and authorizations required for the land development and mining activities pursued by our company throughout Pennsylvania, which is presently about 29 counties. Hopefully you also recognize the unique perspective I offer today, since I am not a lifelong industry representative, but rather as an environmentalist who has spent over 33 years of my career working for Commonwealth agencies such as DER and DEP, most recently retiring in 2010 as the Assistant Regional Director in the North Central region. There I was charged with protecting our state's natural resources, a priority which I have carried over into my current position. Drawing from past and present experience, I am confident that industry truly wants to meet the expectations and regulatory requirements of the agencies overseeing the Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Index process. In addition, I don't believe that industry and government have opposing views on the importance of protecting endangered species and their critical habitat. But in order for companies such as Glenn Hawbaker and those represented by PACA and other industries throughout the state to protect and preserve our natural resources and yet successfully compete and grow our economy, regulatory review agencies must recognize that the role they play is not only critical environmentally but economically. To offer for consideration, in just a moment previous to this, we were talking about oversight and the bureaucracy. To offer for consideration the level of review and oversight which goes into the review and permitting of an average-sized non-coal mining operation requires various levels of involvement with over 20 outside review and regulatory agencies, not including public comment. As this committee is aware, the PNDI process itself involves the oversight of 4 agencies, 3 state and 1 federal. The development of business plans and the ability of industry to be responsive to the needs of their customers is dependent upon receiving timely, complete, and consistent responses from the regulatory review agencies. The existing environmental review screening tool administered by the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program is useful in identifying whether a potential or actual impact for the planned activity exists under the jurisdiction of any of the review agencies within the project area. In cases where the screening does not identify any hits, the process is fairly straightforward. There is no further contact required. It can, however, become considerably more complicated, time-consuming, and costly when a potential or known impact is highlighted. As the representative had mentioned, highlighted does not necessarily mean present. When the screening returns with a known or potential impact, the applicant is directed to a sea agency response document. The current process does not have the ability to offer what the exact species of concern is in all cases, or the specific locations where it might be located. In addition, it does not have the program depth to coordinate between the agencies or offer mitigation options for the business. The proposed legislation, as I have read it, offered as the Endangered Species and Coordination Act, sets out a consistent framework for review that would complement the goals and objectives of both the regulators and the regulated entities. For the resource agencies, I believe it upholds their regulatory authority. It continues to highlight the importance of identifying and protecting the state's endangered and threatened species and habitats. It affords the oversight agencies the opportunity to eliminate duplicative reviews, saves cost, and also gives them a vehicle to make communications and interplay between the agencies more seamless. Related to compliance, it also has a penalty component built in to address violators. For industry and private developers, the uniform framework for each review includes utilizing a centralized database comprised of the information from all agencies involved, and most importantly, a single point of contact to coordinate the searches and responses. By also adopting an independent review element to guide decisions related to additions to the database, there is accountability and consistency. These modifications to the search and response process should make this a much more timely exercise and more cost-effective, in my opinion. The other major benefit included in this legislation is the requirement to assist in the preparation of avoidance and mitigation measures. If we know what we're to be avoiding, we can avoid it. In summary, by enacting this legislation, the long-standing requirements of the Endangered Species Act would be met. The government agencies and the industry applicant would see financial benefit from a streamlined process. The regulatory agencies would have the benefit of pooling their knowledge and information into a common repository. The public would have ease of access to information, and regulated industries would have the ability to identify challenges and costs far sooner, allowing them to not only budget, but potentially modify their plans in a more predictable manner. Thank you for the opportunity of addressing you today, and if I can answer any questions, I will try to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. We appreciate your testimony. First question is Representative Vitale.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. You testified about being in support of the centralized database, and I mean, if you're here around 4:30 or so, you'll hear someone from the Game Commission testify about some problems they have with that. They say, you know, the Natural Resource Agencies already maintain a database on the location of threatened and endangered species, but here's the concern. And information on that database is shared with outside entities when needed in order to protect those species. And they say this: increasing access to that database will increase the risk of unlawful taking of threatened and endangered species, as many of those species have substantial value in the black market. This legislation would require the natural resource agencies to provide a virtual roadmap to location of the species that are often targeted for illegal sale and trade. Now, do you have any concerns in that regard?
I've been out on, over the past 30 years, been out on many site reviews, and I've heard that. I'm not sure exactly what the black market opportunities are. I do know that the concern is similar to when we went through the threats that we had during the WMD days, where we were where we were isolating the location of nuclear and tank facilities in Pennsylvania to avoid the consequences of the public knowing them. I guess I can recognize that they could have a concern. I'm not sure how they would eliminate those species or habitats, though.
Okay, here's another concern. Now, did you say you were here 33 years in the? Did you cite the 33-year figure as your experience level?
I worked for DEP and DER for 33 years. Yes, sir.
That's interesting, because here's the testimony of John Arway of the Fish and Boats Commission. He says, in 33 years with the Fish and Boats Commission, I cannot cite one example where we have not been able to resolve a conflict with industry on threatened and endangered species issue. Can you think of an example where a conflict couldn't be resolved?
I think the perspective I was trying to offer isn't that we can't come to an accommodation. It's rather that why can't we come to one more timely, or why can't we be a little more transparent? I've known Mr. Arway for many, many years. We're acquaintances. I don't disagree that we can't find. Why can't we do a little of that up front?
Right. Yeah, I guess he feels they're already doing that. Can you think of any, and I think this is a dynamic process, and I think in the past 5 years, 13 species have been added to the threatened and endangered, and 11 have been taken off. So it's sort of a give and take process. Can you think of a single species on the threatened and endangered species list now that shouldn't be there?
Again, not to avoid your question, but we employ wetland biologists, botanical biologists. We employ very expensive talent to help us identify those sources so that we can develop our plans to avoid them. So I'm not here to argue or even debate the science of what goes on the list. It's rather, can't we come up with a list so that we know what to avoid and where to avoid? It would make our industry functions much smoother.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is in the legislature, we sometimes try to solve problems that don't exist. So I'm trying to get at, is there a real problem here? I'm hearing from a lot of people that perhaps there's not. But, well, okay, thank you.
In addition, what the state representative has said, I happen to be a sitting school board president for 10 years. And going through the building process, I happen to go through a like event. So it's not that they're not important to be there or not to be there. It's more that can't we find a way for us to work in consort so that there's a little bit more operational value. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Vitale. I'd also like to thank Representative Mark Gergely for attending today. Welcome, Representative Gergely. Next question is from Representative Doyle Heffley.
Thank you. To follow up on the other question, in your tenure with the you were with DEP and DCNR, and your tenure now with the Concrete and Aggregate Association?
No, sir. I work for a private business, Glenn Hallbaker Corporation. It's a privately owned aggregate and transportation company out of State College.
Right. Do you feel that we could do better with our permitting process? Do you feel that this legislation would help?
I do.
What is the?
I'm sorry. The answer was I do.
What is the average? Do you have an average time on, say, a basic permit that you would be applying for just for a basic land development permit? What would be that average time to go through the process to get that from the permit process to the time when you can start developing and creating jobs?
In responding more on the mining side of it, the DEP has gone through several renditions of permit guarantee, money back guarantee, and presently we're into a process that from application to issuance or final decision, we're looking at 180 days basically, but that doesn't include the time that the application is off the clock to the agency or when we have a dispute that needs to be resolved. Many mining permits can and have lapsed into a 1 year plus time frame.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Heffley. Chairman Miller?
Not for this round, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Our next testifier is Mr. Brian Wagner, the president of PA Trout Unlimited. Welcome, sir, and you can proceed.
Okay, I want to thank thank the committees for having me here today. The Pennsylvania Council of Trout Unlimited, as I said, I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony regarding House Bill 1576. Nationally, Trout Unlimited is the premier conservation organization working to protect cold water fisheries and their habitats. Pennsylvania Council, we have over 13,000 members and 48 local chapters that are spread across the Commonwealth, both urban and rural chapters. Our mission is to conserve, protect, restore, and sustain Pennsylvania's cold water fisheries and their watersheds, especially our wild trout resources. Given our mission, it comes as no surprise that we are greatly concerned about the provisions of House Bill 1576. Although PATU is concerned about the impacts of this bill on both wild trout and threatened and endangered species, my comments today will be just dealing with wild trout waters. The current process for designating wild trout streams we feel is rigorous, it's transparent, and it already considers public input. It is rigorous in that data is obtained via well-established scientific sampling methods, and designations are based on stringent technical criteria, including numbers of trout, biomass, and size classes represented. This rigorous scientific process results in yes or no answers. Either a stream meets the criteria for designation as one of the classes of wild trout waters, or it does not. Although designation as a wild trout stream ultimately has regulatory consequences, it is not itself a regulatory action, it is simply a technical decision. The Fish and Boat Commission does not make these decisions in a vacuum. It posts on its website the results from surveys indicating that streams may be eligible for designation as wild trout streams. Proposed stream designations are listed in the Pennsylvania Bulletin at least 60 days prior to any formal action. I believe the comment period is 30 days, giving ample opportunity for comment. As anglers, we pay attention to these listings. If you don't believe that, simply mention Cross Fork Creek anywhere in the northern half of the state. Proposed wild trout stream listings are then acted on by the Commission's Board of Commissioners at its quarterly meetings, at which the public again has an opportunity to provide comment on any business, including that of the designation of wild trout streams. So we already have a rigorous technical process. It's transparent to the public, in our opinion. The decision-making is by a Board of Commissioners that is appointed by the governor and the legislature. It's difficult to imagine what added value would be contributed by the Independent Regulatory Review Commission. Rather, subjecting wild trout designations to the regulatory review process would impose a significant and unnecessary administrative burden on the Fish and Boat Commission. Given budget constraints throughout state government, it seems that now would not be a time to insert more administrative inefficiencies into the process. IRC review would also lead to unnecessary delays in wild trout stream designations, potentially leading to the denial of protections for a valuable resource shared by all residents of the Commonwealth. We believe that the provisions of House Bill 1576 are directly contrary to the wishes of the anglers of Pennsylvania. Sport fishing relies on good water quality, and wild trout designations and good water quality go hand in hand. Any decline in the quality of fishing would lead to a decline in license sales. Last year, over 750,000 Pennsylvanians purchased a fishing license. I believe it was just shy of excuse me, just shy of 500,000 trout stamps. Large numbers of non-residents also purchase fishing licenses in Pennsylvania. This is a significant constituency that accounts for a great deal of economic activity. During 2011, which was the last data that was compiled, it was I believe it was a federal study, anglers directed nearly $500 million to Pennsylvania's economy. And because much of this activity takes place in rural areas of the Commonwealth, many small business owners benefit from these expenditures. Implementing constraints on wild trout stream designations contradicts efforts throughout Pennsylvania to restore streams to conditions that support wild trout. Trout Unlimited, conservation districts, watershed associations, and other organizations have invested untold hours and millions of dollars in restoring water quality to streams that have been degraded by our legacy of water pollution. Much of that work has been funded by the DEP, DCNR, Fish and Boat, and various federal agencies. Designation as a wild trout stream is confirmation that many of these efforts have been successful. Saddling the wild trout designation process with added layers of bureaucracy could mean that between the time a stream has been identified as having wild trout present and achieves the actual designation, less protection is afforded to the stream, allowing progress that may have been achieved by nonprofit, government, and other partners to backslide. In summary, I'm reminded of some advice given me by my boss early in my career when I assumed my first managerial position. He said, hire good, well-educated, and trained people, give them the tools that they need to get the job done, and then get out of their way. The Fish and Boat Commission is staffed by good, well-qualified people who are using sound science to make decisions about the Commonwealth's aquatic resources. We are well advised to stay out of their way and allow them to get the job done. This testimony is respectively submitted on behalf of our 13,000 plus members here in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony and for the information that you provided. One question that I wanted to ask you, you note in your testimony that the current regulations dealing with designating wild trout streams go through the Fish and Boat Commission and are voted on by the board. When looking at that process, what if the Fish and Boat Commission wanted to designate a stream and a majority or a significant number of the public didn't want it to be designated? What process could they actually use other than putting pressure on the Fish and Boat Commission board? What other process could they use to prevent that from being designated?
They would be able to provide public comment, just like any of the citizens or industries.
They could certainly provide public comment, but in all reality, the Fish and Boat Commission could continue to move forward with the regulation. And the only other avenue that I know of right now is the legislature could actually pass legislation to abrogate a regulation. But that's a significant process in itself. And I think that's something we need to think about as we move forward with this discussion.
Yeah, I think the Fish and Boat Commission, does take all the comment, into its decision, and I'm sure they'll be talking about that later.
Something to think about. First question is Representative Tobash.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you being here today, Mr. Wagner. I am one of your members. I like to think I'm an avid fisherman. At least in my mind, I'm an avid fisherman. I don't have quite the time that I'd like to, but I see my friends from Trout Unlimited in Schuylkill County are here. I can tell you I work very closely with the with our Waterways Conservation Department here, Schuylkill County Conservation Department, and I continue to hear conversation from them in our conservation district about how important it is and what a benefit an active industry, coal mining industry, has had to clean up our water resources here in the county. I have to tell you, we've got some wild trout water right here that when I was a child, we wouldn't have believed that we had the resources that were available. And as I have those conversations, they oftentimes, turn to the difficulty in the permitting process. And we heard a testifier earlier talking about predictability. In fact, I was at a hearing, a Senate hearing, at the end of last week at Sweet Arrow Lake. And at that hearing, they talked about the permitting process and coal mining silt flowing into the Schuylkill River, which is now an active fishery. And at that hearing, what we found and what we concluded was that the permitting process is causing us to not be able to afford to remove some silts along the banks of the Schuylkill River that ends up in the fishery and deteriorates the fishery that we have right now. With that said, and your experience with Trout Unlimited, would you agree that the mining industry and the standards that we now operate under are improving our waterways in the Commonwealth?
I would say so. We're not against responsible development, energy development by any means. Just like that, have it be done in a responsible manner. I mean, follow the regulations.
And we have regulations in place, and one of the things that you mentioned before is that at the expense of DEP and our taxpayers, we've gone in and reclaimed a lot of streams, okay? But when we have an active mining industry, I think we have the ability to do that through the industry and current regulation. But doesn't it make sense to you that there should be some regulatory review? Doesn't it make sense to you that if we have a number of agencies that totally are unchecked without the ability of our constituents to weigh in on those matters, or someone else to take a second look at that's problematic to keeping an industry that is improving our waterways vital?
Well, for my testimony, I don't really, I think we have the proper oversight now. To be honest with you, I don't think, adding the other step is really beneficial.
I'm hopeful that we're going to hear from some testifiers a little bit later on, in this hearing, and we're going to hear some specific examples of how the permitting process and the unpredictability is stopping us from cleaning up our streams even further. So, once again, I thank you for your testimony here today, and I appreciate the good work that you do, and I appreciate the fact that we're working together to try to come to some common sense approaches to make sure we can keep going as industry expects us to go, while at the same time maintaining our good waters in the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Pyle.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm sorry you keep hearing from me. It's my bill. I, kind of attached to it. I would, more so a comment, Chairman, if I could. I tip my hat to Fish and Boat. I really do. And Trout Unlimited, too. And I think I might be a member, too, if my grandfather's promise of a lifetime membership years ago was true. In regards to Representative Tobash's question, I think I can lend a little bit more clarity. In Cambria County right now, not too far from Johnstown, the worst acid mine discharge in the entire state. It was abandoned prior to 1960 in the existence of EPA. As we sit here, in 1 hour, 36,000 gallons of iron water, 149 parts per thousand, it's literally orange, is going to come flying out of a mountainside at St. Michael's. It's going to hit the little Conemaugh Basin, and for about the first 200 yards, it's bright orange. As you go, the white starts from all the aluminum and bauxite. Now keep in mind, this was a mining operation that was walked away from in 1962 before there was anybody there to make them clean it up. Fast forward to present. Modern day mining company based out of my district in Katanning finds a seam of metallurgic coal, the good stuff. 200 guys, 30 years, life-sustaining family jobs. For them to go get it, they make submission to the powers that be. Would you let us go get this? Yeah, we want you to clean up the water. And they instituted water techniques that took the iron content of that water from 149 down to 3. They dropped 146 parts per million. That's huge. Now, considering nobody's ever tried this since 1962, the question comes up, why have we not already done this, considering we could clean 60 miles of river basin, the Little Conemaugh, the Conemaugh where it flows through Johnstown at the point, to the Kiski that forms the whole southern border of Indiana County, and into Armstrong, where it flows into the Allegheny, which, by the way, is where they hold the Bass Pro fishing thing every year. I don't think our water's that bad. Here's what we're running into: coordination of agencies. Now, our fishing boat guys go, wow, 149 down to 3. That's awesome. Go for it. But when the feds step in and say, yeah, 149 to 3 is impressive, but we want you down under 0.1, which they could do if they were allowed to use lime to drop the metals out of the water. But that throws it beyond TDS content, doesn't it? So you can't use that technique to clean a 50-year scourge. Okay? What Representative Tobash is talking about is all too familiar for me. This is one of the ones where the government should get out the way, or at least be able to appeal what you feel is an unjust decision. I would agree with you, sir. I tip my hat to Fish and Boat and to Trout Unlimited. As far as protecting fishes and boats, and trout, they're very, very good at what they do. We, however, are in charge of a much, much greater demographic than just that. We're not allowed to focus down on one aspect. We have to look at the welfare of 62,000 people over various size districts. The coordination of government efforts that Representative Tobash brought up is very real, and one that I feel this bill will help cut through. My dad told me a long time ago, honest man has nothing to hide. You make a good decision, you like it, what's the harm in throwing it in front of IRC? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Pyle. Representative McCarter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two quick questions, really. How many streams are currently designated as wild trout streams in Pennsylvania?
I would have to defer. I don't know the number.
Approximately, just.
Could I defer? I don't know. To be honest with you, exactly how many it is.
10.
Oh no, it's more than that.
100.
I'm sure the Fish and Boat Commission will be.
Okay.
Be able to answer that.
If in fact this bill passes, though, as I read the bill, and maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but again, the trout designated streams would have to undergo basically the same review process over the 2-year period as the endangered species as well. So each of these streams would have to go through and be reevaluated again as to why they are listed. And as a result of that, can you tell me, I mean, obviously it would seem in going through that, it's hard to believe that some of them are not going to be delisted, if you will, through that process. What was the effect that you would think would happen on these streams as a result of being delisted?
If they would be delisted, well, they would lose their protection. I mean, like the Class A water, Class A trout waters, basically, that's one of the ways to get to high quality cold water fishery with DEP. So, any high quality stream, has certain protections that are afforded to it, as well as exceptional value streams.
Could you describe some of the protections for, as part of the testimony? I mean, what are some of the protections that are most valuable as part of that?
Yeah, for a high quality, well, basically, if there is development, you have to. There's a process. I think it's Chapter 93 rules. There's a process where there can't be there can't be degradation to the waterway, and if there is, there's a process how you can you can submit an alternate way of doing something that would mitigate that. It's in the Chapter 93 regulations, but basically, I think there is an appeal. If you can't, if you can't show that there's not going to be any degradation, I think there is a process, an appeal process, or a process to go through with DEP.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wagner, for your testimony. You mentioned in your testimony, and I'm from the extreme southern part of the state down near Maryland, so you mentioned about this Cross Fork Creek anywhere in the northern part of the state. You want to elaborate on what you were
That was just an
referring there?
example of how anglers pay attention to these listings. Obviously, we're always interested in our wild trout streams. Cross Fork is actually one I think that didn't make the Class A criteria, so it's just one that was that's of interest to Trout Unlimited. Anglers pay attention to these things. I would say, especially a lot of our Trout Unlimited members. I mean, I probably fish 90-95% of the time, Class A trout waters.
Did something happen up at Cross Fork, or was it just the fact that it didn't get listed?
Yeah, I just believe it just didn't meet the criteria for Class A. I think it's Class B.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Representative Gillespie. Representative Heffley.
Thank you for your testimony. Looking over your testimony, I had a couple of quick questions. The Trout Unlimited, what is the platform for Trout Unlimited when it comes to fish nurseries and hatcheries? Is that something that you would be opposed to or support?
We're not. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, well, we're certainly not opposed to hatcheries or co-op nurseries. We're basically a wild trout organization, though.
So you would be for fishing wild trout, not for fishing stockfish?
No, we're not against fishing for stock trout by any means.
Would you agree in several instances the cost drivers in operating nurseries and hatcheries for both the fish and boat, the co-ops, and other private entities has skyrocketed due to the regulations that have being put into effect through the Class A designation, also the EV designation of streams?
I believe the cost probably has gone up, but
significantly.
Yeah, but the thing is, you really don't. Sometimes hatcheries, they degrade the stream that the effluent is flowing into, so you're basically wild trout. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, why would you want to diminish, a wild trout stream?
So what if there was a hatchery that was in operation for 111 years, and the stream was a designated exceptional value while the hatchery was in operation, and received the Class A designation, but yet that hatchery is still going to have to invest significant amounts of money? I mean, do you think that's good for the fishermen in the area, or do you think that's bad?
If it's a Class A stream, it's the highest level of trout population for the stream. So I would hope that the hatchery would have to meet the anti-degradation statutes.
So what you're saying is then that you would disagree with the Fish and Boat Commission on that, in that instance?
Could you clarify that? I'm not sure.
So you're saying that you would disagree with the Fish and Boat Commission because when they're operating their hatcheries, they had to put in those settling ponds, and the Fish and Boat Commission, would you agree with them that those requirements aren't always necessary?
I mean, I'm sure it depends on what the effluent coming out of the hatchery is, but I think
in the cases that I heard, there was actually there was more abundance of brown fish or trout downstream and fish with the nursery in operation than without it.
Well, I wouldn't want to see the stream, any degradation to the stream. I mean, if we can put safeguards in place.
Well, those safeguards are very cost effective, and I just would go on record as saying that while I love the name Trout Unlimited, been a fisherman most of my life, not a very good one, but in talking with most of the clubs and fishermen and sportsmen's organizations in my area, they have found Trout Unlimited, maybe not the members themselves, but the organization itself has been backing a lot of restrictive regulations that are really prohibiting fishing opportunities and stocking opportunities. So, but I thank you for coming here today.
I would disagree with that, but.
Thank you, Representative Heffley. Representative Maloney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Representative Tobash. Good place to be here. I have a sister, actually, that graduated from this school, and she was always very proud of it, so I thank you for having us here. Thank you, testifiers. I'm going to keep this short. Representative Heffley actually did ask a few questions and brought up a few concerns of mine. I think what I'm hearing here today, and quite frankly, as a avid sportsman and a member of Trout Unlimited, by the way, I think what's really important here is to find this balance that many members have talked about with respect to how we work with our agencies and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania works together, being able to either use your property, create jobs, whatever that might be. I think what troubles me, hearing, well, I guess one representative did quote quite a bit of what's going to be testified from the Game Commission and Fish Commission, but you know, part of your testimony was $500 million in Pennsylvania economy. I have a lot of data with respect to how we have lost hundreds of millions, even into the billions of dollars of money that our sportsmen would have provided in this state alone. So we know it's a problem. I think, in my mind, what we have to do is recognize that there has to be a balance, there has to be a cohesion, and I want to give you a couple examples that have been difficult for me to comprehend. I have stock trout in a lot of the east and a lot of the north central part of the state with the Fish Commission. I think they do a fantastic job. I've been part of gun clubs and fishing clubs that have bought thousands of fish for us to help to influence the younger generation, which I'm afraid is going to be our endangered species, because we are losing them at a tremendous rate. And quite frankly, as Representative Heffley brought up, if we don't have the help of the Fish Commission to help to entice the young people into these streams with trout that we are raising on our own and stocking in our own streams, we have proven that we have protected many of our streams and waterways to exceptional value and high quality. So I guess when I have a bridge, let's just say, for instance, in my district, that can't be worked on, and I know, quite frankly, it's during the trout season, and I get that. But why can't we, like, for instance, I had a resident that wanted to put, if I wanted 10,000 trout in that stream, he said, I'll buy them and put them in there. There aren't any in there now. But we have regulation that don't let us construct a bridge because of a DEP regulation and or a possible trout that might be in this small stream that none of us would go fish because there aren't any there. So I think what you're hearing is a little frustration on the part of members who are sportsmen, members who hear from their constituents all the time, contractors who can't move forward, and I credit you with a lot of passion, I'll say, with respect to something that we all, I think, agree with, that we want to see have here in Pennsylvania. But I think what I'm hearing here today, which really frustrates me as I really help my constituency and try to deal with the interest that we have, is we do have a special interest, and I think it should be Pennsylvania. So to basically say that we might degrade a stream because of the stock trout, I have a little problem with that. I know what the millions of dollars it's costing the Fish Commission to purify the water so that they can continue their operation. For us to only help our young people. When I see those little kids on the side of the stream, it's what I think is our future. If we can't continue that with some sort of common sense, to me, we're going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Can I respond to that?
Certainly.
Oh, well, I want to just make a few clarifications. I mean, I don't want people to go away with the thinking that Trout Unlimited is against stocking trout or hatcheries. We just I don't want you to go away thinking that, because there's streams that stocking trout is definitely a benefit to sportsmen and youth. I agree with that. And I also want to just mention that Trout Unlimited is very involved with our youth. Matter of fact, I'll be at this Saturday, I'll be at our local state park doing a family fishing program. So I just want to make it clear that Trout Unlimited is very youth-oriented. We do a lot of youth activities, and we're not against stocking or hatcheries. We just, if you're talking about a high-quality watershed, you don't really want to see degradation, and that there's a cost of doing something that you don't want to degrade your water quality.
I don't know anybody that would want that. And if you want to talk about degradation, I can go off on that subject myself. But the fact of the matter is, it seems to me that that is what you're saying. I don't know why. I don't know. The part I'm missing here is what you're assuming is degrading the streams. Do you have an answer to that?
Could you clarify that, please?
Yeah. What am I to get out of the reason for the degradation?
Oh, so I was asked about degradation from hatcheries. I think it's basically the effluent that comes out of the hatchery needs to be treated in some way. I don't have the specifics, but that's basically, someone asked me about hatcheries, so that's why I was just referring to that as far as effluent coming from hatcheries could possibly degrade the stream quality. I'm not inferring that we're against stocked fish. I mean, I fish for
Thank you, Mr.
some
Chairman.
streams for stocked fish.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Mao.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief, I promise. And Brian, thank you. And I appreciate what Trout Unlimited does. I truly do. I'm definitely a sportsman myself. But I just want to get it clear. And we're talking, I'm going to try and relate this back to this bill. Trout Unlimited and its 13,000 members are saying we don't want an extra set of eyes overseeing what goes on, because that's kind of what this bill does.
We don't see the need for that. The Fishing Boat Commission, it's basically, using science to come up with, the biomass of a stream. We don't really see the need for, an extra.
DEP is full of experts also. Recently, I'll say this year, and I'm not going to name names of where it's at, but most people here know, I had the privilege of touring a hatchery, one that was on the chopping block to be shut down. And while talking with the biologist, he was telling me that part of the reason why it was shut down, it was on the chopping block to be shut down, is because DEP, their regulations had made it so expensive to keep it operating. And to top that off, he said, we're almost putting distilled water back into the stream, which is very unhealthy for the stream itself. Now I was standing there talking to him closer than I am to you right now. Wouldn't it have been good to have an extra set of eyes on DEP when they come out with those regs? And if that, and I don't know if Fish and Boat took that off of the chopping block or not. That's up to them. I know I'd hate to see that. But because of overburdensome, overreaching regulations by some departments. You guys could possibly lose tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of fish each year that's being produced by that hatchery because they've gone overboard. And you're telling me, as representing 13,000 members, that you wouldn't just like an extra free set of eyes to take a look at what's going on. See, I think we're in the era of accountability and openness. And I really truly believe that everyone should say, we want open eyes and openness and an extra set of eyes wherever we can get it. Not that they're doing anything wrong, but remember, not too long ago, there was an expert that knew more about global warming than anybody else in the country, right here at Penn State University, that come to find out all of his data was flawed. He made it up. Not that I'm saying that anybody in Pennsylvania in any of these departments did, but extra eyes are always a good thing, and I think that's the direction of this bill. I would certainly hope that you would rethink it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Mao. Representative Gobler?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Wagner, thank you for being here. I really just wanted to take the opportunity, and I've been very quiet because I'm here to listen and learn, and I appreciate the conversation. But I do think there was something that was said maybe 10, 15 minutes ago that was just a little bit technically inaccurate with regard to the bill. There was an assertion made that the designation of a wild trout stream in the bill would cause those wild trout streams to become de-designated in 2 years unless redesignated. That's technically not correct. The way the bill reads, page 4, lines 15 through 21, this centralized database actually only relates to species designated as threatened or endangered. It does not relate to the listing of a wild trout stream. So I just think that's important that if there's anybody who is concerned in this room that this bill would cause any trout stream to become delisted, that's not a valid concern because this bill does not speak to the delisting of any trout stream. So I just wanted to add that for the good of the order. Appreciate the indulgence, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Wagner, I thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Representative Gobler. That's an important point to point out. Thank you. Mr. Wagner, thank you for your testimony and for standing for questions, and we appreciate your testimony.
Hey, thank you.
Is our stenographer doing okay? Our next testifier is Mr. William Perulis with WPJ Engineers and representing the PA Anthracite Council. Welcome, sir, and you may proceed.
Thank you to the committee for allowing me to testify here today. My name is William J. Perulis. I'm a registered professional engineer and land surveyor in Pennsylvania and president of WJP Engineers, Pottsville, Pennsylvania. I've been involved as an engineer in the anthracite coal industry for almost 40 years. I'm testifying today on behalf of the members of the Pennsylvania Anthracite Council. The Pennsylvania Anthracite Council is a trade organization representing surface and mine and preparation plant operators, as well as the suppliers that produce anthracite coal mined in the Commonwealth. Our organization serves about a dozen mining and coal preparation companies, representing 90% of all the anthracite coal production. In addition, my consulting engineering firm provides engineering services to several dozen small mining companies and also represents their interest in this testimony. Currently, the anthracite coal industry produces about 2 million prepared tons of coal annually and directly employs about 1,000 workers who contribute direct payroll of $45 million to the Pennsylvania economy. The anthracite industry is greatly concerned about the impact of the Endangered Species Act on mining properties throughout the anthracite region, in particular in the designation of habitat areas which adversely affect the mining of coal on those properties. Having had the opportunity to review the bill as presented, we agree with the intent of the bill to add more structure and transparency to the designation and reporting of endangered species and also the designation of wild trout streams. Of special interest to the anthracite industry is Section 6 of the bill concerning permits and approvals, and is the main focus of my testimony today. Specific issues being faced on a regular basis today are mostly centered on the Pennsylvania Game Commission protocols, which require significant effort in research, field studies, analysis, and interpretation to confirm the presence or absence of endangered species and their habitat or potential habitat. The implementation of the protocols is time-consuming and expensive and are cost-prohibitive to small coal operations and place a significant burden on larger operations. Several studies potentially required are time-restricted to certain periods of the year, which also places a further burden both on the applicant and the permit process. These requirements are being initiated on new permit applications and also being related to revisions to existing permits, which are required for the industry's compliance with state and federal law and the Pennsylvania DEP regulations. The impact of the studies themselves is significant, but the overall impact on the mining properties throughout the region can be monumental. The studies are not limited to areas now being used by endangered species, but are targeted towards areas that have the potential to be used as habitat for endangered species. As examples of the problem, my engineering firm is currently working on 2 specific anthracite coal operations, 1 existing permit outside of Mount Carmel, PA, and a new permit for operations at a site near Eckley in Luzerne County. Both illustrate specific concerns for the industry. Both permits were subject to the current PA Natural Diversity Index PINDI review and received comments from the Pennsylvania Game Commission regarding potential habitat for the protected bat species. Most mining properties in the anthracite region have been previously mined, with abandoned stripping pits, spoil piles, culm and refuse piles prevalent features throughout the area. Large areas of second growth trees are also present on these properties, some of the areas which are considered potential bat habitat. The area at Eckley is a prime example, as portions of the area have been identified to potentially have summer roosting habitat, such as various types of trees, rock piles, abandoned strip mining pits, etc. The problem is that these features are not unique, truly unique to this area. They are indicative of almost any mining property or potential mining property throughout the anthracite region. While we are working through the details of an approval on this site with the Game Commission, the major concern here is that the same type of habitat likely exists and could adversely affect any mining property. Any areas identified as habitat which are disturbed must be mitigated by constructing replacement habitat. The Game Commission policy requires any potential habitat disturbed must have restrictions placed on it or be mitigated at a 2-to-1 ratio. Further, after the habitat is mitigated, the new habitat is restricted from being affected in the future, and studies to the effectiveness of this mitigated habitat are required. The other significant potential problem is habitat for winter hibernation, which is relevant to the second permit we are working with. Mines have always been habitat for hibernating bats, but without the restriction of being protected areas. A specific problem with this type of habitat is abandoned mine openings and crop falls, which are mine subsidence areas where the surface has collapsed into shallow mine workings, and in the most severe cases are open to the abandoned workings below. These openings are also prevalent throughout the anthracite region, with many mining properties potentially containing multiple openings. The Game Commission protocol considers these openings as potential hibernating habitat areas. The designation of these areas as habitat will restrict them from being disturbed. That protection will restrict the coal operator's ability to strip mine the areas, backfill, and restore the areas. The crop falls are also hazardous areas with documented cases of injuries or deaths. There can be multiple openings on a property, and the protocol is requiring that all must be investigated.
This is time-consuming and expensive. A further complication is that if studies are needed to trap bats to determine if they are using the openings for hibernating, the protocol limits these studies to 1 month out of the year, September 15th to October 15th. This can cause serious delays to the property owner and the coal operator. The designation of these areas as protected habitat can have significant effects on mining properties and also on the abandoned mine properties, making effective abandoned mine reclamation projects more difficult. Our concerns are for the procedures to be implemented in defining habitat and the overall effect of determination for restricting activities in the designated areas. We agree with the proposed bill, which would limit the consideration of impact only to those areas which have been identified as critical habitats of listed species. It would further limit the requirement for testing and analysis for potential areas. We request that the legislature give consideration to this testimony in that potential habitat areas being identified and restricted from disturbance unfairly limits planned activity with the potential result in significant loss of economic and environmental benefits on those areas. Thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony today, and we welcome the opportunity to discuss any questions today or in the future as the legislative process proceeds. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony. First question will be from Representative Tobash.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate you testifying here today. Hey, do you believe that reclamation projects are not getting completed because of overregulation? Do you believe that there's reclamation projects cleaning up the environment?
My understanding is that there are reclamation projects that have been delayed or canceled because of issues like this.
And do you believe that this bill would add some consistency to the process and possibly enable some of those projects to get completed?
Yes.
And do you think that with those jobs, with backing off on some of this regulation, or at least adding some consistency to the process, that we're going to be able to maintain more jobs in the region?
I believe so, yes.
And do you think that in the end, that some consistency in this process and the regulatory climate here is going to help us clean up our environment?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Pyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the audience gathered, I'd like to make you aware that one of the reasons this bill was framed was when Representative Tobash brought Mr. Peroulis' case to me. For those of you who aren't familiar with some of the terms being used, reclamation, where I live, that's called a bony pile. These are typically gigantic clusters of rock left in place from before EPA and DEP existed. And what would happen in the 60s and 50s and 40s in times of our grandfathers, they would go mine coal out of a mountainside and leave the rock laying there. And there was no governmental agency to require them to clean it up. So Mr. Peroulis, actually Representative Tobash brought your case to my attention, and it just defies logic. You're saying you're willing to bring your company into an old bony pile right here in Schuylkill and clean that thing up, haul that all off to a cogen somewhere that's going to mix it with limestone and burn the carbon out of it, but you're going to clean up this massive, massive pile of rust and old rocks, and you're going to employ people, good, gainful living wages to do that. But was it Game Commission or Fish and Boat?
Game Commission.
So as I'm informed, you made federal application, yes?
Yes.
And you had the permit already from them?
Actually, we received a clearance from U.S. Fish and Wildlife on the permit that
to
you're
go ahead
referring
and
to.
work the patch.
To go ahead and start the operation.
So what did you have to do to get that okay from the feds?
On this particular operation, there was a study done for, in particular with the federal Indiana bats.
Indiana bats.
It was cleared that there were no Indiana bats within the area. There were a few unprotected bats found, and they found one juvenile Pennsylvania protected species in the area. U.S. Fish and Wildlife signed off within probably about 30 days after the study was presented to them, which was a little over a year ago, actually. At that point, the Game Commission said, well, we still want the area investigated for Pennsylvania endangered species habitat. We started working on that at the end of last year, and now we're still in the process of pinning down the Game Commission sign off on that. Part of the problem is we have a plan moving forward. The coal operator that is going to do the operation is different than the landowner in this case, and the landowner has raised some objections to the mitigation that we would have to put in place for the Pennsylvania protected species. So it's, we've been working on this probably for a year and a half now.
You said something, and this is the one that's banging the bell for me, Chairman. Future potential habitats.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not questioning him anymore, Mr. Chairman, if I could make a comment to you. If you go to Kiskamenis Township, Armstrong County, you'll run into people back on Route 56 that swear up and down they've seen Bigfoot running around. I don't doubt it. Where I live is perfect habitat. Broad blanket forest, ample water supplies.
I'll remind you that the chair's not taking questions.
Well, if we're going to go future potential habitats, Chairman, I got
Chair.
a whole fleet of unicorns to bring up to your district. Thank you, Mr. Paroles.
If I can just respond to Representative Pyle's comment there a little bit. That's one of our main concerns, is that in a lot of the areas on these mining properties, we're dealing with potential habitat where, a certain section of the property is deemed to be really suitable habitat, but then I, as a non bat expert, which I'm not, I can look at what he says is habitat and what I look all over the other sections of the property, and it looks like the same areas to me. So, it's a potential for a monumental acreage of potential areas, and we're talking about small areas on I think we have about 500 acres of active permit that is has had maybe an acre and a half of habitat identified, but it severely restricts what the operator can do, including filling in some abandoned stripping pits.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Paroles.
Thank you, Representative Pyle. Representative Maloney?
Is this on? Okay. One question for you, sir, with respect to costs or regulation change in the last several years, or I guess the question, the way I should put it is, have you seen an increase of recent years to regulation and or costs of permitting? I know the answer for quarries, but with respect to your type of business, I really don't know the answer to that.
With respect to permitting in the anthracite coal industry over the past several years, the cost of permitting has risen steeply. Some of the items we're spending, I'm going to say 4 and 5 times as much time in getting a permit approved as we were 5 years ago. And that also relates to other sections. Our consulting firm is not just in the anthracite coal industry. We do a lot of work with stormwater, PennDOT permits, and the like. Stormwater has increased 5-fold since 2006. and that's no exaggeration.
Thank you. Just a couple comments with respect to some of the comments I made earlier about the lack of common sense, and I think what we're seeing here is, again, the concern. I just give you a couple, for instance, back home and some of the places where I did business in the past, you may have been required to do a bog turtle study. And I had several people in the business and myself where the individual who had to be contacted to come to do the study would say, sorry to tell you, this isn't the habitat for bog turtle, but that'll be $2,500, please. I think this is some of what the real world deals with out there, and I think some of what I'm hearing from you. I'll give you another, for instance. I have an exceptional value stream in my area that, in light of what was talked about earlier, where individuals have been pretty much directed by the DEP to do a study on the effluent that might be coming from bad septic systems into that stream. So the fix to it would be to put holding tanks in to stop the effluent and let the people pump those tanks out so we would not pollute the stream. But guess what the DEP said? You can't put them in. So 13 years later, the effluent's still going in the stream. Yeah.
There's a lot of examples of that throughout the state, I'm sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Snyder?
Chairman, and thank you for being here in your testimony. You said it's taken you about 1.5 years to try to get through the process to do the reclamation job. Have you been given any indication of how much longer it might take before you may be able to start that work?
No, there is no indication of an ending date. Well, hopefully we're going to get it resolved soon, but you know, as we proceed through the permit process, there's no guarantee, regardless of the permit guarantee that's you know, touted by certain people in the state. There is no permit guarantee timeline. We submit an application, we get comments back from DEP or whatever agency we're dealing with, respond to those comments, usually at least 2 or 3 times, you know, back and forth until we get to the point where it's ready to be issued. Part of the problem we've been having with the Game Commission, they have some very specific protocols, but the methods to go about to answer those protocols are subject to interpretation by the people that are looking at them and the people who are doing the studies also. And that has caused us some problems too.
So this could go on for a while yet for
This
you?
could go on for a while yet, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Snyder. Thank you, Mr. Perlis, for your testimony. We greatly appreciate it. Our next testifiers is a panel of the 3 agencies that actually are dealt with in this legislation. Mr. Dan Devlin will be testifying on behalf of the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Dan is the director of the Bureau of Forestry, and we also have with us today Ms. Ellen Ferretti, the secretary, acting secretary of the department, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today. In addition, we have Mr. Carl Rowe, the executive director of the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and Mr. John Arway, the executive director of the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. And did the 3 of you decide who wants to go first?
As listed.
As listed?
No pun intended.
Congratulations, Dan. So we'll hear first from Dan Devlin with DCNR. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Chairman Kauser, Chairman Miller, Chairman Vitale, and committee members, thank you again for the opportunity to respond to House Bill 1576. I'd also like to highlight the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources' involvement with threatened and endangered species. As we stated, I am Dan Devlin. I'm the director of the Bureau of Forestry and DCNR. DCNR's mission is to conserve and sustain Pennsylvania's natural resources for present and future generations. Part of our responsibility is to maintain an inventory of the Commonwealth's ecological and geologic resources and to conserve native wild plants, which do include threatened and endangered species. DCNR is the largest land steward in the state, actively managing more than 2.5 million acres of state forests and state parks. DCNR actually has two main roles regarding threatened and endangered species in Pennsylvania. First, the Wild Resource Conservation Act directs DCNR to determine the status of wild plants. It creates an enforcement system to protect endangered, threatened, and vulnerable wild plant species. It creates a permit procedure for persons interested in wild plant management. It creates a commercial license procedure for persons who purchase vulnerable plants, such as ginseng that we heard about earlier today. And it authorizes DCNR to create a statewide system of private wild plant sanctuaries. DCNR has adopted regulations through the requirements of the Regulatory Review Act to implement this program. DCNR's second main role regarding threatened and endangered species is through Act 18 of 1995. And it mandates that the department create, maintain, and inventory the Commonwealth's ecological resources. Section 305 states that DCNR shall have the power and its duty shall be to study and protect the Commonwealth's ecological and geologic resources. So DCNR's responsibility is to conduct surveys of significant ecological resources and provide this information for reference. Currently, DCNR works in partnership with other Commonwealth agencies through what's known as the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, which you've heard about a little bit already today. We do this to collect the biological and ecological information throughout the state. PNHP is a partnership between DCNR, the Game Commission, Fish and Boat Commission, and the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy to conduct inventories and collect, analyze, and distribute data to describe the Commonwealth's rarest and most significant ecological features. That information is stored in a centralized database and shared with individuals and organizations. Those individuals and organizations use the information for conservation, development planning, and resource management. The Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Inventory, as has been called affectionately today, PINDI, is the environmental review function of the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. PNDI system is managed by DCNR in order to provide conservation information, which among other things is used for development planning, resource management, and also permitting. Anyone including property owners, environmental consultants, industry staff, project planners, conservation planners, and Department of Environmental Protection can access the tool for PNDI project screening. The PNDI Environmental Review tool is used during any project pre-planning phase prior to submitting application to DEP or for other state or federal funding requirements. The PNDI Environmental Review tool screens projects and provides the user with instant responses regarding species and resources of concern in their project area of interest, including, as we've heard earlier, a instant no impact response, again, where nothing else is required, listing of species occurrences known within the project area, avoidance measures to mitigate the impacts, and conservation measures, which are voluntary measures to minimize impact to non-listed species and resources. House Bill 1576 standardizes a state process for listing threatened and endangered species, consolidating the listing into a centralized database managed by DCNR and granting access to information in the database to outside persons as defined in the legislation. As I stated earlier, DCNR already has a process established which include the Independent Regulatory Review Commission to list species under our jurisdiction, plant species in particular, as threatened or endangered. While the department has not taken an official position on the legislation, we do have recommendations for the committee. And our recommendations revolve around definitions for persons and listed species, and specifically the terminology used for both of those definitions. We feel that the terminology is somewhat ambiguous, and we are concerned about data sensitivity and access to sensitive data. As I have explained, there is a robust system in place to inventory and disseminate ecological information to those who need it. As the needs of the users constantly change, DCNR continues to adapt its tools and policies to meet the needs of the user while still fulfilling our statutory obligation of protecting species. The protection of natural heritage species and resources can be accomplished in harmony with development needs across Pennsylvania. The PNHP and PNDI environmental review tool can help guide planning and development, avoiding impacts to biological diversity and exemplary ecological areas. Thank you, and be welcome to take questions whenever we're done with the panel.
Thank you, Dan. We'll hold questions till the end of the three testimonies. So we'll move next to Mr. Carl Rowe.
Chairman Causer, Chairman Miller, good to see you again. Chairman Vitale, members of the House Game and Fisheries Committees, and members of the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee. As always, it's a pleasure to be before the House committees to offer testimony on important public policy. I could easily provide testimony for an hour or more as to why this piece of legislation does not serve the public nor the wildlife resources. But we since only have a few minutes, I'll address a couple of the most important aspects. Clearly, the protection of our natural resources is a prime concern of the citizens of the Commonwealth. In repeated survey results indicate that over 90% of the public expect us to manage the threatened and endangered species to preclude extirpation of those species. It is one of the primary missions of the Pennsylvania Game Commission and a key element of our strategic plan to preclude additional species being placed on the list, and we do also our best to improve species populations to take them off the list. In the past 10 years, we've only added 3 species to the list, and we'll be removing 1 this year. The ability to manage the species through the classification system is critical to their survival. The resource agencies have the expertise and the will to best manage the threatened and endangered species program. However, in doing so, we work with industry and other interested parties to find a balance on the criteria we establish for those species. The next element addresses the idea of using federal criteria. We as state agencies have fought for a long time to keep federal requirements out of the state's rights to manage wildlife. This is a constant battle, and we believe that states have a much better idea of the species inside our boundaries than the federal government has. If we can list species at the state level, we can in many cases preclude them from becoming a federal listed species. Additionally, in most cases, the federal requirements are much more onerous than the state requirements, and let me give you an example. As you heard earlier, Indiana bat is a federally listed species, and I'm sure you've received letters, emails, and phone calls on the strict and uncompromising restrictions of the Indiana bat. We as a state agency must also comply with the federal restrictions on Indian bat, and they have hampered our operations. Have any of you received a call on the small-footed myotis, a small-footed bat, a state-listed species of bat? We can better control the requirements and the avoidance, minimization, and mitigation factors at the state level. Once it gets into federal listing, we have virtually zero ability to make compromises to facilitate agreements. I have even sat on negotiations on behalf of industry and tried to facilitate compromises with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services on Indiana bat issues. Leaving the decisions or letting species get to the federal level of listing takes away the control from the states and limits our ability to find a compromise. And herein lays the great irony with this legislation. The one species that is commonly referred to as a catalyst for this bill is the Indiana bat. However, that is a species that is federally listed. This legislation will make it more difficult for agencies to list species as threatened and endangered, which will guarantee that the Fish and Wildlife Service will take a more active role in listing species. Thus, instead of preventing restrictions like those associated with the Indiana bat, this legislation will ensure that more species are federally listed and more burdens are placed upon entities which apply for permits. One of the issues addressed in the proposed legislation is the sharing of data in the Pennsylvania diversity inventory. In fact, we already share that data, and I'll get to a little bit of that later on with some answers and some questions possibly. The PNDI system is in place to help facilitate the issuance of permits and at the same time protect the species. The system allows the identification of areas that have T&E species and how we can assist in the avoidance, mitigation, or impact minimization and mitigation of those conflicts. With good communication, we have assisted many companies in their pre-planning goals that have in fact saved them considerable costs. We have great concerns in the opening of point data for general use, as there is a considerable risk in that data. And if you wish, I can provide specific instances where once point data was known, entities have altered the sites to eliminate the T&E species. As an agency, we feel we are a facilitator in getting this process through the system, and we work to ensure both the industry and the species concerned are protected. It is clear the Pennsylvania Game Commission does not support this legislation. It is an increase in bureaucracy that results in totally inefficient and ineffective governance. Having an independent regulatory commission review the actions of another independent regulatory commission, and I want to reiterate, the Pennsylvania Game Commission is an independent regulatory commission, and I'll answer some of the questions. It's not this testimony, but I'll answer them now. The Board of Commissioners are separate from the agency. The agency has no authority to promulgate regulations on their own. They go before a board that is appointed by the governor, ratified by the Senate, those members. Not dissimilar to your IRC process when you appoint IRC members. They're appointed independent of the agency. So our process is already reviewed by an independent appointed commission, which is the Board of Commissioners for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. So in essence, you're going to have another independent regulatory review commission review the actions of an already independent regulatory commission, which is clearly redundant, and I think will have a negative impact on your constituents on getting things through, and certainly have a negative impact on our wildlife. I'll be glad to answer any questions when the time allows.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Mr. John Arway, Fish and Boat Commission.
I feel like it's the bottom of the ninth, and there's 2 outs, and I'm up to bat. So good afternoon, Chairman Causer, Miller, and Vitale, and members of the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee and the Game and Fisheries Committee. For those of you that don't know me, my name's John Arway, and I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. On behalf of our Board of Commissioners, over 1 million anglers, over 330,000 registered boat owners, 62 species of state threatened and endangered fish, reptiles, amphibians, and mussels, and the trout and other aquatic resources live in 13,294 miles of wild trout streams. That should answer a question that was posed before. Throughout the Commonwealth, thank you for this opportunity to explain our agency's effective and efficient procedures for conserving Pennsylvania's most vulnerable species and the streams that produce and sustain trout better than any hatchery ever could. In my 33 years with the agency, this is the first time that I can recall an executive director being asked to testify before a joint hearing of your 2 committees. I can think of no issue more important and fundamental to our mission than that which we are discussing today. Our commission lists and delists threatened and endangered species and designates wild trout streams pursuant to authority included in the Fish and Boat Code. This authority and supporting policies and regulations have fulfilled the dual purposes of protecting rare species and wild trout streams while allowing for responsible business and growth. Since our founding in 1866, the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission has worked judiciously to protect, conserve, and enhance our Commonwealth's aquatic resources. The executive and legislative branches have always looked to us for our scientific and professional expertise, vesting us with the responsibility to look after the welfare of our waters and to conserve our fish, reptiles, amphibians, and other aquatic organisms. In 1974, your predecessors had the foresight to empower our agency to, and I quote, promulgate rules and regulations governing the taking, catching, killing, and possession of endangered species within the classifications of fish, amphibians, and reptiles. This action was Pennsylvania's necessary follow-up to the 1973 enactment of the Federal Endangered Species Act. In 1980, your General Assembly adopted the current definitions of threatened and endangered species in the Fish and Boat Code. I would argue that our state legislation is even more important than the Federal Endangered Species Act, since protecting species at the state level is the most proactive way for us to prevent their extinction. Because House Bill 1576 appears to provide protection only to federally listed and T&E species, species that are rare within Pennsylvania but not globally rare would not be protected effectively, conserving species at the state level. Conserving species at the state level prevents regional and range-wide declines that require federal listings. This is the same is true at the state scale. It is important to provide state protection because most state-listed species are located on the edges of their respective ranges. Many experts, including myself and my staff, believe that if states properly protected the rare species within our state borders, there would be no need for a federal Endangered Species Act. Again, your predecessors in the House got it right 39 years ago when they voted 186-1, followed by a unanimous Senate vote, to give our agency the authority to take action to prevent the need to resort to the more costly, time-consuming, and difficult federal requirements. The testimony you have before you is 12 pages and reflects our official agency position on this legislation. And despite the fact that Director Rowe yielded his remaining time to me, I won't take that up.
Only once.
And since I won't have time today to deliver the entire statement, I can, however, summarize our comments on the scientific and public policy problems House Bill 1576 would create, and we'll be available to answer questions about these issues should you have them. So first, we currently use the best available science, and that's natural science, not political science, for threatened and endangered species listings and wild trout stream designations. Second, our rulemaking process is transparent and consistent with current law. We welcome all data and public comment, and we don't need more regulatory oversight. The methods we use are peer-reviewed and developed in concert with experts from academia, business and industry, and other government agencies. Fourth, we have always been able to work out differences with industry for the benefit of the species, their critical habitats, and jobs. We are committed to determining the appropriate listing levels for all species under our jurisdiction. In fulfilling this charge, we are constantly refining the list based on sound scientific data. This leads to removing as well as adding species. Conservation of species at the edge of the range has always been recognized as one of the most important things we can do to prevent their extinction. Reverting to only federal listings will cause more species to become federally listed. States have the obligation and parent authority to protect species that are not currently on the federal list. We can choose whether we exercise that authority, but we believe that it is our duty as trustees of our natural resources, yours and mine, and this administration's, under Article 1, Section 27 of our state constitution, to preserve the people's right to clean air, clean water, and the preservation of our natural resources. After all, they are the common property of all the people, including generations yet to come. Pennsylvania is a trout state. We have more anglers that fish for trout than any other species of fish. The brook trout is our state fish, and we are all proud of our trout fishing heritage. Identifying streams to support good trout fisheries leads to special protection of water quality in wetlands, which protects everyone in Pennsylvania whose water comes from a stream or river. As an update to our written testimony, about 12% of our wild trout streams are Class A, or the best of our best, which is about 2% of all the streams we have in Pennsylvania. The old notion of environmental protection competing with economic prosperity has proven to be unfounded. In his 1992 and 1993 papers entitled Environmentalism and Economic Prosperity, Dr. Stephen Myers, a professor of political science from MIT, observed, quote, after examining 5 primary indicators of economic growth and prosperity that figured most prominently in the public policy debate, no negative effects could be detected. It was simply not true that states with stronger environmental standards fared less well than those with weaker environmental standards. The analysis uncovered a consistent and systematic positive correlation between strong environmentalism and stronger economic performance. I can testify to that because when I grew up near Pittsburgh, all the buildings had windows that faced away from the river. Today, we build buildings with windows facing the river. From our experience, the same is true here in Pennsylvania. While my staff and I sometimes hear anecdotal reports of how we are impediments to business, critics are hard-pressed to come up with specific examples. This reliance on science is at the heart of national environmental policy and dates back to one of our country's foremost conservationists, President Teddy Roosevelt. The next time you pass the marker in the state capitol commemorating Roosevelt's trip to Harrisburg, remember that he believed that only the best available science should be used to make natural resource management decisions. That is exactly what we do. ultimately subjecting the Fish and Boat Commission's listings and designations to review by outside entities will have the effect of eroding our agency's status as an independent administrative agency and allow others to influence how our Commonwealth's aquatic resources are protected and managed. In closing, no one has been able to explain to me what the problems are with Pennsylvania's current system for protecting threatened and endangered species and designating wild trout streams. If there are issues that need to be addressed, we have already repeatedly shown that we are always ready and willing to work with legislators, businesses, and other partners to find solutions. I leave you with a final conclusion from Dr. Meyer's paper, which reads, quote, "Those who live and work in states that have vigorously pursued environmental quality and are now contemplating rolling back environmental standards, just as this House bill does, as a quick fix to jump-starting their economies out of a recession should reconsider. Based on evidence, there is no reason to expect that loosening environmental standards will have any effect on the pace of state economic growth," end quote. Thank you again for the opportunity to share our perspectives. I welcome your questions both today and after this hearing. I would also welcome the chance to have you join us in the field sometime to see our staff experts in action or to join me in sampling the health of one of those wild trout streams using our own sampling sticks. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. The first question will be from Representative Pyle.
Actually, Chairman, I was trying to make a point of clarity. Gentlemen, I filed 2 bills. You're commenting on the other one. The one that limits you to the federal endangered list has nothing to do with House Bill 1576. Nothing. It's a totally separate bill. And to call out your challenge, Hanson just left the Allegheny, that's 60 jobs. How many you got? Yeah, I'm really torqued about that. And for the record, I don't know who ordered the divers down on the Freeport Bridge piling to scrape the mussels off, but I'm a non-expert. Even I know that's an 80% mortality rate when you dislodge them from their original attachment place. But what do I know? But since we're asking, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Pyle, thank you. Chairman Miller.
Thank you. Mr. Rowe, I just have a question on part of your testimony because it left me a little bit confused. It says, if you wish, I can provide specific instances where once the point data was known, entities have altered the sites to eliminate the TE species. Are you saying that because they knew where these were, they went in and eliminated the species, or they eliminated the conflict with the species?
They eliminated the species, or the conditions for the species to be there. An example of hibernacular was an issue a few years ago. Somehow some went back to check it a little bit later and found burnt tires inside the hibernacular, so clearly there were no more bats in the hibernacular.
Okay. What confused me is the next sentence says, as an agency, we feel we are a facilitator in this process.
Well, we're a facilitator in the PNDI process, in assisting as early as we can in the pre-planning process, not in the extirpation process, clearly.
Okay. It just, I looked at that and I thought maybe the first sentence was miswritten and they were able to use the data to not impact the T&E species.
No,
Thank you for that
confusion.
Thank you for that clarification. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Barbin.
Thank you for your testimony today. I just want to try to put this in context because I think it was somewhat fair to say what this bill does and what this bill doesn't do. What this bill does, according to the testimony this afternoon, is to ask a fundamental question as to why isn't the Game Commission, why isn't the Fish and Boat Commission subject to the same rules that DEP is or that DCNR is, since they all have scientists? Can you answer that question for me?
I'll answer for the Game Commission because as the system is designed, there is already an independent board of commissioners separate from the agency that provides that regulatory control. Our board of commissioners have voted down different things. They've said we're not going to bring those things forward. So that independent regulatory action that the IRC would provide is already there. DCNR doesn't have that, DEP doesn't have that, all the other agencies, no other agencies that I know of have that independent regulatory commission separate from the agency reviewing the process.
Do you believe that the state of our regulation as it relates to both the environment and to business issues that need to be balanced, do you believe it's different today than it was 39 years ago when the bill was passed that excluded the Fish Commission and the Game Commission from the independent regulatory review process? Do you believe it's different today? Do you think there's more regulation?
Let me take a crack at that first, because I think we don't operate any differently today than we did 39 years ago. And I think
I didn't ask that question. The question I asked was, do you think that there's more regulation today from multiple agencies as it relates to environmental and business issues? That's the question I want answered.
outside of our agency there is, inside of our agency there is not. Okay. And if I can clarify what I mean by that.
I think you have.
Our decisions are factually based. They're driven by how many wild trout are in a stream and how rare a species might be. What flows from those regulations has greatly increased over the last 39 years. There are a variety of regulatory programs that we have today that we didn't have 39 years ago that use the information we produce to make other regulatory judgments. You've passed laws since then that use the information that you've asked us to produce through our rulemaking processes. Our rulemaking process hasn't changed. It's still based on facts, sound science, and we believe we still produce that for other agencies to use in their regulatory programs.
I have a problem with that. And until this hearing, I was inclined to sit on the sideline. But there are two things that bother me about your answers today. Number one is you're saying that the Game Commission and the Fish and Boat Commissions are the only agencies in the United States that really shouldn't be subject to checks and balances. And number two, what you're saying is the people that have other, maybe differing points of view that are also supposed to be regulating business and the environment, their science isn't as good as yours. Now, our country was based on checks and balances, and the other thing it's based on is that the collective wisdom of all people are better than the wisdom of any one person. That's what the country's based on. What you've done is you've basically said because you appointed us, you appointed these commissions, you can't question our judgment. And the problem with that is today it takes 2 years to get a reclamation project going. Now, yes, I'm incredibly mindful of the fact that we need to protect our waterways for fishermen, but I live in Johnstown. And I saw what happened at St. Michael's, and today we actually have clean water coming to the point where the Conemaugh and the Stony Creek come together because there was a compromise made on what the water quality issues how they should be resolved. So I'm sitting here listening to DCNR say this is a good bill. I'm here listening to you and Director Rowe say it's a bad bill, and I don't understand your position. I don't think you should be worried about having somebody look at it, another person looking at it, and I don't think that the real question on the permit time has anything to do with whether you should be reviewed or not. I think you should be reviewed, and I think the permit process should be sped up. And if you do that, I think our waters get cleaner and our fish get better.
Well, if I can just respond a little bit. The first part of your statement about us being open to full disclosure for information. We are that. We don't need another review board to develop more information to make that decision. We take public comment subject to all the rules and regulations that are in place now under the Commonwealth Documents Review Law. We're open to public comment even after we do the listings, because the more information we get, the better decisions we can make. Our decisions, there is an appeal process. Some of you question whether there's an appeal process or not to those decisions. There's certainly an appeal process. We have an internal appeal process, and then we can go to Commonwealth Court if somebody disputes the data we use to make those decisions. We've never gone to Commonwealth Court either on a wild trout designation listing or on a threatened and endangered species listing. So that tells me that we're doing a pretty good job with the information we have, because if we weren't, we'd be challenged at least once over the course of history but we haven't been. So with that, I'll turn it back to Carl.
I guess with the situation you're describing with permits, I would offer that regulatory process does not fall under the Game Commission. It falls under IRC. DEP falls under IRC. DCNR falls under IRC. All that process, in fact, was approved by the IRC environment. So to say it's the Pennsylvania Game Commission and Fish and Boat Commission, we don't get to say no. We offer a comment into the permit process. The ultimate decision is made in DEP under a regulatory process approved by IRC somewhere along the line.
But it's the cost of these wild trout designations, and it's the cost of the list that you're preparing that you don't want to have anybody else have a say in. And those costs are real to business. They are. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, let me give you an example. If you drove up 61 today and you looked out across the horizons, how many wind turbines did you see out there? Quite a few on that ridge line if you came up 61 and took the right-hand turn over Frackville. Through a cooperative wind energy agreement that we established with the wind energy, we were able to expedite the review process on many of those sites to allow those turbines to go up. It was a cooperative agreement entered voluntarily by parties. We only have 2 companies in the state that aren't part of that agreement. We give them pre-planning data. We work with them. We facilitated the process to have that industry move forward in Pennsylvania. So when we work together and have good communication, it works.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony today.
Can I respond real quickly? And I thought I made it clear in our testimony that DCNR does not have a position on the bill at this point in time. So I just wanted to make sure the record showed that.
You made that clear.
Thank you.
Chairman Vitale?
There's just a point in the beginning that I was a little confused on that the maker of the bill made, and you know, I'm just looking at the bill when it talks about where was that? It's here. Page 3. It said coordination of designation. No Commonwealth agency may take action to designate or consider fish, wildlife, or plants as threatened or endangered unless the fish, wildlife, or plants are designated under the Endangered Species Act or pursuant to this act. So when I was reading Mr. Elway's testimony, it seemed like he was commenting on the right bill, so I don't really understand what the maker of the bill was saying as far as testifying. Mr. Elway, it just seemed like you were testifying with regard to that paragraph, so it doesn't seem like there's any wrong testimony here. It's just page 3, lines 19 through 24, right?
It is. Although we're troubled by the IRC provisions, we're really troubled by the fact that this bill sets different rules by which we determine how a species is listed or not. Yeah. And by looking at the global range rather than the state range, which this bill changes those standards, it really limits the universe of species that will be on the list to those that are federally listed.
Right, yeah, sure. That's what I thought. Great.
Take the mic if you want to.
Well, just take a look then at your bill, page 3, lines 19 through 25 then, and tell me what you see. Go ahead, take a look. Page 3, lines 19, 25 of House Bill 1576, printers number 2133. Here it is.
Chairman Vitale, if we could let him look at that section. We have a number of questions. We'll move on and we'll come back to this if you'd like to. You have additional questions?
I do not.
Okay. Give Representative Pyle a chance to look at that, and we'll move to Representative Tobash.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was that working? Okay. And I appreciate the director's your testimony, Director Grove and Arway. One of the comments here, one of the quotations from your testimony, Director Arway, is in 1974 your predecessors had the foresight to empower our agency to, and I quote, promulgate rules and regulations governing the taking, catching, killing, and possession of endangered species within the classifications of fish, amphibians, and reptiles. That's an interpretation of what someone was thinking in 1974, and I know my predecessor here. I think I know him pretty well. I'm going to go seek him out after this testimony. I'm going to ask Mr. Representative Hefner what he was thinking at that point in time. But when I read this, it could have been very well something that I voted for if I was there in 1974, because to me it sounds like you're empowering the commission to take action against individuals who take, catch, kill, or have possession of endangered species. But we've gone far beyond that. And for that reason, this is more of a comment than a question, I think that within this regulation, within this legislation, we should be allowing the House of Representatives, as well as an independent regulatory commission, to give us a second opinion. I think it's only reasonable. Your interpretation is that you can promulgate these rules, and that may not be the interpretation of the body or the citizens of the Commonwealth at this point in time. Your point, Director Grove, about working well with people who are putting up windmills or alternative energy in the Commonwealth is fine. But what we've also heard here today is that we're looking for some level of consistency. I mean, I see these processes continually managed by exception. And maybe you can cite examples where the exceptions have worked well, but we've heard testimony that says we need to be more consistent with our policy, and for that reason I think we really needed to get this legislation passed, have some consistency within the law, and allow us to take a second opinion when rules come about and regulations. So thank you again for your testimony. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Representative Tobash. And we'll return to Representative Pyle, if you could address that, the question by Chairman Vitale.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the question, Chairman Vitale. The section you're referring to, if you look towards the end, the phrase is "or." They may use either the Endangered Species Act of 1973, which is already currently force majeure, or pursuant to this act. They can use either, sir. It's not a mandate.
Yeah, if I can just say, pursuant to this act means that the species that we list out, if this legislation were passed, would be restricted to those species that were globally rare, not rare just within the boundaries of Pennsylvania. So that's the concern that we have. And if you rare or data that are gathered throughout the range of the species. The range of the species would then extend far beyond the boundaries of Pennsylvania. That's our interpretation of the act. If the act suggests that we're still going to use the same standards as what we use today, then we would develop a different opinion. But right now, the way we read the act, the legislation, is that we would extend the analysis of whether a species is rare or not beyond the boundaries of our state.
There appears to be a misinterpretation of the language. I'm going to ask Greg Raffensperger, who's reviewed this bill extensively, to speak to it.
Thanks. We have multiple microphones. Okay. The thing to remember here is under the language of this bill, the agency must follow the provisions required in the bill to designate the streams, the fish, wildlife, etc., unless they are already designated. The Federal Endangered Species Act does not limit the agencies to designating something within a certain range. All it does, under this language, is puts those regulations, when you make those specific designations, under the process set out in the bill, which means evidence, so forth, why you're making those regulations has to be forwarded to IRC and forwarded to the standing committees, and they have to be reviewed by IRC, just like DCNR does, just like DEP does. It does not limit you to only designating species that are already federally listed. You can still protect them as you always did. It's just another set of eyes on those regulations.
Like I said, Greg, I can point to the language on page 4, conditions for designation, which says any designation for an endangered species shall be made only when the species is endangered of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of its range. Now that really extends the rule to not just Pennsylvania, but a species range would extend across the globe, not just Pennsylvania. So that really limits our ability then to look at the species that just serve as home and serve as Pennsylvania for their home.
line are you on, John? On page 4, what line are you on?
28, 29, 30, and it extends to page 5, 1 and 2. And the same applies for threatened, the same definition for threatened. So if the writer of the bill can provide more clarification of that, we'd be happy to talk about exactly what that means and how it applies to what we do now.
I actually think there might be some language missing there. I think it's within its range in Pennsylvania. I'm thinking that's the intent. Is that correct, Jeff?
I'm thinking we might have slipped out in Pennsylvania, so if you'd like to amend, I'd love to have you on the bill.
Well, we've got some other things we need to talk about, but that would be a start, Jeff. That would be a start. That's a major one.
It's all about finding the middle, John.
But your point is well taken, John.
Thank you.
But I would like to, and what Representative Powell just said is about finding the middle. I would offer throughout the recent years in particular, we have continually found the middle. I mean, you've heard a few stories here today that may be exceptions to the norm, I would offer. Marcellus shale industry in Pennsylvania is going boom. We have on our game lands, and I think Representative Everett was with us last week on Game Lands 57. We got a mine reclamation going on. They've been there for 40 years. We got Marcellus shale gas on state game lands. All these have been, and one of the big challenges we have is keeping up with the permitting process, to be very honest with you, particularly on pipelines, where you have miles and miles and miles of pipeline that need to go through the process, and we have a minimal staff to achieve that. We've expedited that process. We move people into that process to be able to make those things go faster. So I would offer, again, I go back to Senator Vitale said, excuse me, Representative Vitale said, you know, what problem are we fixing here?
Trying to think of who was last. Next question, Representative Mao.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I'll try to be brief. Carl, I heard you say just a little while ago that you already have an independent review board called your commissioners who review and approve. I would assume, John, that works exactly the same way, Fish and Boat. What are the qualifications to become a commissioner of either one?
I believe the law says sportsmen, interested parties, people concerned, not too much different than the qualifications to become an IRC commissioner.
So you don't have to.
They're pretty broad.
Pretty broad.
They're pretty broad.
So they're pretty much going to take the word of, like in your case, they're going to take the word of your dear biologist, or in your case, your waterways biologist. So he's pretty much. I mean, if I'm on the board and a biologist that works for me is saying, Dan, this is the way it is, I know nothing about it. I might be a good angler. I might be on your board. I might be a good sportsman and a friend of the governor. He puts me on your board. But I know zero about what that biologist is talking about. I have no choice but to take his word. And he works for me. So what am I going to do?
No,
Not take his word?
He doesn't work for the commissioners. He works for the executive director. And I will tell you.
And you report to?
And with some heated discussion between commissioners and biologists, it's not always a clean, smooth process.
Dan, could I just mention that?
Sure. I'm not trying to pick a fight.
No,
I'm just trying to make a point here that.
But IRC works the same way. They have regulatory review analysts that advise the commission about what position they should take on issues. Then the board decides what position they take on issues.
Let me take it one step further. Do you guys ever go outside to get an independent, let's say another biologist or another expert in the field and say, I'm not sure I want to go with this. I want to hear it from somebody else instead. Does that ever happen?
Absolutely. We use the Pennsylvania Biological Survey as our advisory committee for all the T&E species designation issues that we deal with. And they develop an advisory report to our staff that then uses that to go to the commissioners. So in the PAPS is comprised of industry, of government, and of academia. The species-specific experts on their technical committees.
And I would offer most time these species get nominated by somebody else besides people in the Game Commission. There's a process that they use to bring that nomination forward, to go through the process for nomination. We review, and in fact, is the data correct? Either validate or find problems with the data. That's how that process works. Most of them don't come from within inside the agency.
Okay.
Those requests for listings.
All right. One quick little story, and again, this is going to go back to a timeline thing, because I'm real big on that. I spent 25 years in the construction industry. I think you guys, I've told you that several times. I've been on the receiving end of waiting on permits in the past. Let me just give you a little quick story of something that happened in my district just this past year. PennDOT replacing a old, rusty, worn-out pipe running under a 2-lane road with a brand-new concrete pipe because they're getting ready to resurface the road. Obviously, that's the right thing to do. You do it first, then you pave. And one of the list of criteria to get the permitting done was to look for a bog turtle, okay? I think they've been looking for a few years. We haven't found any bog turtles down there yet, but we're still looking. But the bottom line is, why would we waste the state's money, the taxpayers' money, looking for something when it's not going to change the job one iota? The job always was, always will be, to take out the old pipe and to bed in a new pipe. When do we say common sense must prevail? But yet they had to do that study. And whether the study showed a bog turtle there or not, they were still going to have to do that job no matter what, unless you want cars to fall through the old rusty pipe down the road. When do we get to a point where we say, this makes no sense?
Well, since that animal's a cold-blooded one, I guess I have to take this one?
I think so.
But this legislation would not change that, Dan?
This one wouldn't. I'm just making a point, as in, you know, we need something built into legislation for time, because we heard another gentleman back here saying he's been waiting 1.5 years for a permit from PGC. Did I hear that from Mr. Palutis? Was it? Is that his name?
First year was federal.
Okay, but the bottom line is, no matter whether you call it tax dollars, whether it's state or federal, it's still tax dollars. No matter whether it's permits, it's still, you know, it's costing the taxpayers a ton of money, costing private industry a ton of money, causing jobs delays, all this stuff. And if we don't start somewhere with working on getting permits back in a timely manner to people, whether it's us or them, but, you know, this is why this legislation is here, so we start thinking about these things.
Yeah, the bog turtle is a federally listed T&E species, so this wouldn't do it. The other part, the real reason for the time delay is because DEP controls the permit. Fish and Boat, Game Commission, DCNR have nothing to do with time delays and permits. We're an advisor to DEP, and they can tell us to go away. You know, industry could go to DEP and say, Fish and Boat, Game, DCNR, they're not right, we've got our own data, therefore you can issue our permit. DEP has to sit on the fence because the rules and regs require them to make sure T&E species are protected. So if they believe that any of the resource agencies are not telling the truth or trying to delay the project on purpose, they can move forward with the permit anytime, any day. They're at risk of either an appeal from the resource agencies or the developer, which is why it takes so long to reconcile the conflict. So they got to resolve all the concerns, not just one of the concerns.
Okay.
Let me give you an example
Sure.
of working with PennDOT, because we go through the same issue as them. We've gone into a land banking program with them where they'll purchase land, give it to us as mitigation for future activities. So they'll go down and come into a situation where they may have an instance where they have a PNDI hit, and the land that they've given, primarily wetlands, but to be very, is most common, they've already banked wetlands for us. It affected, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5 acres. They've already gotten the bank. They moved through the project. They pre-mitigated the disturbance. And that's a program we set up with PennDOT, and it's worked out very well in many, many cases.
I wonder how many people in private industry can afford to do what PennDOT can afford to do. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mile. And I want to follow up a little bit on that same line of questioning to kind of put it in perspective. And it keeps recurring here today. What is wrong with extra checks in the system? And I think Representative Barbin hit on that extensively. And when we've heard a lot here today about the Game Commission Board and the Fish Commission Board being independent boards, but when you really look at it, to put that into perspective, the Game Commission has 8 members of their board. Fish and Boat Commission has 10. They're appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. They serve 8-year terms. Something that I personally feel is way too long. We've actually passed legislation in the House to reduce those terms to 4 years, of which both commissions have been very opposed to. I think we should reduce the terms to 4 years for accountability. I think an 8-year term is way too long. But getting back to the issue, what if people disagree with the Fish Commission, with the Game Commission? What other avenue do they have? What's wrong with a second set of checks and balances in this system? And I think that it's something we need to think about and consider as we move forward with this issue. IRC, we're hearing a lot today about IRC and about how that's just redundancy, adding another layer, but IRC is not providing the scientific data. IRC is providing the process. IRC is just making sure that the process is followed. So I'm not sure that that's a bad thing. It's about a system of checks and balances, and it's about making sure that there are checks and balances in the system before we move forward with regulations that affect many, many people. So I think we need to think about that as we move forward, and I know there are a number of other questions, so I'll move forward. Representative McCarter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could someone, the three of you, either one, does this legislation in your minds, or anybody else's minds for that matter, have implications for loss of revenue from the federal government?
Well, we asked that question to the federal government. And Carl's staff sent a letter to the Northeast Region of Fish and Wildlife Service where we receive our sport fishing and boating restoration funds, and Game gets Pittman-Robertson funds, which are the federal excise tax that are on fishing and boating and hunting and trapping equipment that the federal government receives for all the states and then allocates them back to the states based on how many hunting licenses and fishing licenses you sell. So we asked that very question because we were concerned about how the legislature reaching into our independent authority might have some impact on how the federal government views us spending their money. And they told us they've got serious concerns about how that money, or how the legislature is going to, how this bill is going to affect how that money is going to be used. And I'm not real clear, nor are they, about what the fiscal impact of this legislation would have and what the federal interpretation would eventually be if this legislation would pass. But there's essentially about $8 million in game fund at risk and
$20 million a year Pittman-Robertson right now.
20 for the
Pittman-Robertson funds. $20 million like we get for last year and this year for Pittman-Robertson funds.
And we're looking at over $10 million for a DJ Wallabro funding, sport fishing and boating restoration fund. So really, it all would depend upon how the program would be designed to handle the changes that are in this legislation, and then how the feds would view it.
So this could cost us up to $30 million from the federal government, potentially.
Well, that's how much we get. I'm not sure, what influence that would have on this funding.
If I could go back to a question I asked earlier, and maybe you can give me a little help on that as well. When the original IRC process was designed back in the early 80s, and it did exclude the agencies involved, could you comment as to why you thought the agencies were excluded?
Well, I was back there in the early 80s when that discussion was being done. I was a rank and file fish biologist, but I did listen a lot to what was going on in Harrisburg, and my view was that it was because we had our own independent review process, regulatory review process in place. We do a public interest review. We have an independent board of commissioners. We follow the public, the proposed rulemaking and the final rulemaking as part of the public review process. So I think we do everything that IRC does right now, except we do it in a slightly different way.
And one final question, I guess it's more of really a statement. As the bill's currently constituted, and again, we're having some discussion as to what's actually in terms of interpretation here, as to what the range is, et cetera. It seems to me, and it's only from somebody who's not an expert, readily admit that, but at the same time, we're looking at legislation that moves to shift the balance. As you're describing what's taking place, there may be examples, and I hold to my colleagues here, that there may be examples that we can cite here and there and so forth of problems that are taking place with interpretations, or let's say in terms of process for too lengthy. But overall, the nature of this particular bill shifts to a regulatory agency of non-experts. It takes away the basis of scientific explanation, except for what takes place, the initial part. Now we're looking at one set of eyes on the commissions themselves, the independent commissions attached to your agencies, puts it to an IRC process that begins then with another set of eyes that are not experts, moves then potentially into the House and into the Senate with another set of eyes, and I don't think too many of my colleagues would disagree with the fact that we're not experts in these particular areas, and moves it through that process over something that may last as up to 2 years, surely longer than 30 days. There are species, and I know this question was asked earlier about the nature of something that might happen very dramatically and come about in that. And we do have species already that are threatened to the point that are 98, 99% already, gone. And yet they haven't even made it onto the list. As someone said, we have a rubber stamp of agencies here that automatically do that. That surely hasn't happened with those species and many of the concerns that have been addressed here. It seems to me that this is pushing us far too along the path of going back to a time before Teddy Roosevelt, where we had robber barons who made all the decisions for us in the industries here in Pennsylvania even, and ended up with many of those tailings and other things that we look upon still today. We need to, it seems to me that the balance is there. And if we don't want to go so far back, that we should be able to reach accommodation to accommodate those particular concerns that have come up in ways in which we can balance habitat environment in a much better way than using a hammer to solve a problem that probably needs a fly swatter in this particular case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sankey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You actually asked my question, so I yield to Mr. Powell or whoever's next.
Thank you. Representative Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, in the interest of time, I'll try to be blunt, as I think I do the best that way. We heard a lot about disagreements within agencies, biologists, if it's scientific, if it's not scientific. Mr. Rowe, you mentioned the windmills. I understand there's a collaborative effort, as you said, to work with landowners and/or agencies. But I would also remind you that looking in the woods, most people would like to see deer and not necessarily windmills. I bring that up for the reasons that, I think we forget what the mission of some of the agencies are when we talk about mixing these oversights or getting a separate set of eyes. I have to bring up deer management because, as another representative asked about the fiscal impact, the money loss, the revenue that's typically generated, we know we're in hundreds of millions of dollars of loss. Hundreds of millions. So I'm not so sure why we would be so concerned about the possibility when we already know that there's hundreds of millions of dollars lost. It's interesting to me that DCNR doesn't take a position on this. You've stated yourself, places in Pennsylvania, a deer has to bring his lunch if he lives there, which means to tell me that habitat isn't good. DCNR says that that's part of their mission. I'm not so sure why we're not seeing that improvement. Yet we still have DMAPs. If you don't have deer in an area, why do you still continue DMAPs? And you're not concerned about why we would need an extra set of eyes? I mean, your own people said it wasn't done under science. How many times have I heard science today? You people don't manage our deer herd under science. We weren't born yesterday. Mr. Rowe, I have to bring something up with respect to what you said, that there aren't any decisions made without the commission. And yet you told me emphatically you write the checks on your executive power to the tune of $250,000 apiece for a couple. I mean, there's such an irritation here to me that the people of Pennsylvania are trusting agencies to do the right thing. They put pressure on us to clean house, and all we get is stonewalling. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Heffley.
In regard to some of the comments that were made earlier as to why why we need the extra set of eyes, I would say it's because I'm hearing it from all of my constituent bases. I matter if I'm talking to the sportsmen, the business community, or the folks at work, referring to people that want to simply open up a trout hatchery and are stonewalled because of different stream designations. I don't refer to that family-run business as robber barons. I refer to them as a family-run business who's trying to hire a few people. We continue to mount more and more regulations. This code set up in the 70s, it worked well up till now, but because I'm hearing it from every angle, from the sportsmen, from the business community, and from private citizens, and just from the guy that wants to take his grandkid fishing on the weekend. I do believe that something needs to be done. I think this House bill is a first start. As far as comments made earlier by my colleague that we don't know everything about all the issues we deal in, that's true. However, I try to get versed and learn as much as I can going on trips, and I thank the Fish and Boat Commission. I was on a study of a trout designation. It was very enlightening. I learned a lot, and I think my hat's off. I really commend the work that you do in the field, and I think you do a good job. However, I do have some concerns if we don't have that layer of oversight. We live in a democracy, and I have to answer to the people that I represent. And when I come back and say my hands are tied, I can't do anything, that's frustrating. And I think we've had several conversations, and one of my issues right now is the designations of streams and how that impacts nurseries and hatcheries. And I believe that you're sympathetic to some of those views, but I believe that this layer of oversight would help in some of those cases, and it would give the legislative branch a voice in these matters, and that's what I'm asking for in the legislation that was proposed for term limits, Fish and Boat Commission, and in this here is people aren't stupid. People entrust us with their tax dollars. If an agency's suing another state agency, guess what? It's all the taxpayers flipping the bill. If the PennDOT has to move a bridge, and God knows we need to build a lot of bridges, I don't think it's appropriate to ask for a 30-cent gas tax. I think it's more appropriate that we look for solutions and how we can build these things cheaper. And this is one of those solutions, is how can we work together, as Representative Mao said. Now, that's not everything is incorporated in this legislation, but I think it's a good step-off spot in how we get started in rectifying some of these wrongs. Because the taxpayers are broke. They're losing their homes, and they're losing their jobs. And we can give tax breaks, and we can work on the tax code, but until we work on the regulatory processes that in our state, then we need to, that's what we need to do to bring back an economy so people can work and afford to live here. And doing that in the most environmentally friendly way is the way, the approach that I'd like to see. And I think I would speak for myself in saying that I love the outdoors. I was an Eagle Scout, hiked a lot of miles on the Appalachian Trail. I go hunting and fishing, but I'm not very good at it. But I thank you for your testimony today, and I think that a lot of the frustration you're hearing from members is just that frustration that we feel that we don't have a voice, and that the people expect us to have a voice. That's why we were voted in. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Heffley. And thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. There's been a lot of information presented here today. I want to thank Chairman Miller and our staff for working together to be able to host this joint meeting. As I said, we've collected a lot of information. We're actually planning a second joint public hearing in the western part of the state, and we're going to be getting that information out very soon. I also want to thank Representative Tobash and the Empire Beauty School for hosting us here today, and this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.